Hey, everybody. Welcome. Glad to be back. Let's go.
Spoken of the American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is just a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
Welcome, everybody. I am back from my travels, and it's certainly been exciting. I was in Russia for a conference in which a new electoral organization was formed. There's a video about that here on the channel. I was in St. Louis, Missouri for the Uhuru movement, and their amazing plenary of the African People's Socialist Party. I was a guest speaker at that. That was great. Video of that is coming, from what I understand. I'll post that video as soon as I have it. My presentation there, to be in the presence of Chairman O'Malley, and a lot of great things are happening. And, I am back from my travels, and I appreciate all of you, and I've missed you all. And I'm looking forward to having yet another great late night conversation. So happy Lenin's birthday. Happy April. Happy Earth Day. We'll be talking about all of that tonight. We're going to follow our usual format, which is first I give my opening remarks. Then from there, we do the roll call. And then from there, I answer your questions for the remainder of the night. So if there's something you would like me to talk about in the second half of the show, I just need you to go to buymeacoffee.com/Caleb Maupin and just send me a question. Somebody already did it. Unanimous already did it. Richard Unanimous. And so I will be answering his question first, but, keep them coming. Happy to answer your questions. So as far as announcements, August Center for Political Innovation is having our national 7-day training workshop. That'll be in the Chicago area. So if you're a CPI member, mark your calendar and sign up. Please spend 7 days with us in August. And if you're not a CPI member, join. And people have been joining this month. Noah, our Northeast regional captain, has a list of 4 new members to call. Very exciting. So if you're one of those 4 members, hold your horses. You'll be getting a call soon. Keep an eye out in your email for updates. A lot of great things are happening. We are moving ahead as an organization. The Center for Political Innovation is marching forward, and I'm very, very excited. I do sound different because I'm having horrendous spring allergies right now. I have been blowing my nose all day. I've got a lot of water here. I may have to take a break and cough at some point. But yeah, I'm having allergies like you wouldn't believe. So that's probably why my voice sounds different. So if I sound more nasally, or maybe a little bit, my throat, my voice sounds a little bit deeper today. That's what's going on there. Hopefully I'll wake up tomorrow and the allergies will be gone, and I won't be, sneezing and coughing and itching all day long. But that's how these things work. That's just kind of something I have to deal with. And at least my face isn't bright red like it has been for the last couple of days. But that's how these things go. You all get it. You all are my great community. So, as I said before, we'll be following our usual format. So opening remarks, then from there, I answer people's questions for the rest of the night. We do the roll call, and then we do that. So if you got a question, buymeacoffee.com/Caleb Maupin. I also do Rumble Rants. You can also cash at me at Caleb Maupin 22. So let's jump right into it. April 22nd, 1870 is the day that Vladimir Lenin was born. Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov, who was a prominent Russian Marxist, was a member of the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party, a follower of Plekhanov, the father of Russian Marxism. Then within the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party, Lenin started to develop his own theories of how an organization should be formed. He wrote a book called What Is to Be Done, which was quite a pivotal book in the history of politics, developed the concept of propaganda. Right? If you ever heard the word propaganda, that word comes from Lenin's book, What is to be Done? And in the book, he described agitation and propaganda as two different methods of revolutionary organizing. You agitate to the masses, you propagate to the advanced. He developed the concept of a democratic centralist vanguard party, a party of new type, and he developed a political movement that became known as Bolshevism, which means majoritarianism, because his followers were the majority of the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party, the Marxists. They eventually took power and established the Soviet Union. And in the Soviet Union, April 22nd was Lenin's birthday, and it was a national holiday, 1870. Well, today is April 22nd, but in America, this is also a national holiday, but it's a different national holiday. It's Earth Day. Earth Day. Why is it that Earth Day is on Lenin's birthday? But it gets more interesting. When was the first Earth Day? Look it up. The first Earth Day was April 22nd, 1970. Very interesting. The 100-year anniversary of Lenin's birth was the first Earth Day. Interesting, isn't it? So what was happening in the world in 1970? Well, the USA was losing the Vietnam War in the aftermath of the Tet Offensive. The USA was losing the Vietnam War. Communism was on the rise in Latin America, in Africa, in Asia. China was led by communists. The Soviet Union was led by communists. Eastern Europe was led by communists. Cuba was led by communists. The Korean Peninsula was led by communists. There had just been a huge communist uprising in France, May of 1968, 2 years before, where France almost had a communist revolution. Students on college campuses across America were protesting the Vietnam War. The African-American community was in a state of rebellion. The Black Panthers were riding high. And April 22nd, 1970, no doubt was going to be a day in which there were a huge amount of outpourings of celebration of the 100-year anniversary of Lenin's birth, the Lenin Centennial. And it was on the Lenin Centennial that Earth Day was established. Now, who was president in America in 1970? It was Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon was not a left-wing president by any means. He was a conservative. He was a McCarthyist. He had come out of the far right, the John Birch Society. He was a conservative who'd come into office saying he spoke for the silent majority that did not approve of the anti-Vietnam War protests, that did not approve of the Black liberation protests. He promised he would escalate the Vietnam War. He was using the FBI to go after Black activists. So why did he then create a left-wing holiday about environmentalism? And on top of that, why did Richard Nixon create the Environmental Protection Agency? The modern environmental movement, as we know it, was brought to you by Richard Nixon. He created the national holiday, and it was Republicans who voted along with the Democrats to make Earth Day a national holiday. On top of that, Richard Nixon created the Environmental Protection Agency, the first agency dedicated to regulating the environment. So Richard Nixon was president, and on the 100-year anniversary of Lenin's birthday, why did we then create a kind of left-wing environmental national holiday? Well, at the time, the main critics of Earth Day were what was called the John Birch Society, which was a far-right organization that had been very influential in the early 60s. By 1970, they were losing influence. And they believed that Earth Day was a communist conspiracy. They argued that environmental regulations were impeding the free market, that environmental activism was done by socialists and communists, and they thought that Earth Day was a communist plot, a way to sneak celebrations of Lenin into the American public. However, it was other forces like the Communist Party and others that had a different interpretation. And they thought that Earth Day was probably intended to distract from Lenin's birthday, that whether there would be huge parades in Moscow, huge parades in Beijing, huge parades all over the world, that it would be good to give American radicals something else to do and create a government-sponsored leftist holiday around environmentalism. And April 22nd, 1970 was the date of a huge national mobilization. Members of Congress, senators, Democrats, and Republicans convened huge rallies in major cities where hundreds of thousands of people marched for environmentalism. And it was sponsored by the US government. It was huge demonstrations. At the time, students were going out and protesting the Vietnam War and getting arrested, and black people were going out and marching for civil rights and black liberation and getting arrested. But the US government organized and sponsored with millions of dollars these huge environmentalist rallies, and members of Congress and elected officials spoke at them. Very, very interesting. What was going on there? Why was it that they did Earth Day on Lenin's 100th birthday? And why was it that the US government devoted all its resources to sponsoring it? We don't really know for sure, but generally the interpretation that communists had was that it was intended to distract. It was to give left-wing activists and others something else to do to distract them from Lenin's birthday. I have come to the conclusion that it was much more than that. And I will tell you why. And it relates a lot to what this YouTube channel is all about and what separates us from the mainstream left. And it has to do with this book, Theories of Surplus Value. This is a book by Karl Marx. It's actually volume 3 of Capital. Capital Volume 1, Capital Volume 2. Capital Volume 3 is called Theories of Surplus Value. Capital Volume 4 is called Grundrisse. And Theories of Surplus Value was published after Karl Marx's death. And in it, Marx critiques various economists who came before him. He critiques the physiocrats and Ricardo. He critiques Adam Smith. One of the economists that Karl Marx goes after in Theories of Surplus Value is an economist named Robert Thomas Malthus. Robert Thomas Malthus was a British economist who is responsible for the term overpopulation. And Karl Marx basically exposed that Malthus was a completely fraudulent economist, and that his famous essay on the principle of population growth, from which the term overpopulation was coined, was what he called a lampoon against the French Revolution. That across the ocean, across the English Channel, in France, there had been a very bloody revolution to overthrow feudalism and bring on the rise of capitalism. And in Britain, a lot of the wealthy and powerful people, and especially the landed aristocrats, were quite nervous. And they wanted to know why it had happened. So Robert Malthus came up with an answer. The poor people have had too many children. The poor people are breeding too much. There's food shortages, and the food supply doesn't grow as fast as the population. And so you have to have a bloody, violent catastrophe in order to decrease the population because the food supply hasn't kept up. That was his theory. And Malthus' theory of overpopulation is missing a very, very key point, which is that it is human beings that make food come out of the soil. It's human labor power that plants the seeds, that plows the fields, that picks the crops, that makes food come out of the soil. So if you have more people can then produce more food. And that Malthus' economic theory of the principle of population growth, the theory of overpopulation, is premised on the notion of non-productive consumers, that there are people who just eat but don't increase the wealth of society. Non-productive consumers, the more derogatory term is useless eaters. And that it argues that, there's all these useless eaters out there, and the amount of crops being produced and the amount of wealth being produced by society is not enough to take care of them. And so there's overpopulation. So it is necessary to have catastrophic events. And that he basically is arguing that, instead of having events like the French Revolution, we should just try to kill off the poor people. He argues in the essay, we should court the return of the plague. We should do everything we can to, keep the population low so that we don't have events like the French Revolution. It's an awful, awful piece awful writing from Malthus, and Marx just rips it to pieces. And it doesn't seem to understand that human beings are the source of wealth. Now, Malthus's ideas were popular among the rich, and they're actually referenced. If you've ever read A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens, right? The villain Scrooge, right? At one point, they ask him to donate, to help the poor, and he says, "Are there no prisons? Are there no poorhouses?" And then they say to Scrooge, "Well, some would rather die than go there, Mr. Scrooge." And he says, "Well, if they'd rather die, then they ought to do it and decrease the surplus population." And Scrooge is portrayed as this ruthless, selfish, evil capitalist in A Christmas Carol, and he's existing in the early 1800s, in the time in which the ideas of Robert Thomas Malthus were quite popular. And so Scrooge is portrayed as a Malthusian in the writings of Charles Dickens. And it was generally considered to be a rather repugnant worldview that rich people had. But then fast forward to about 1900. About 100 or so years after Malthus wrote this, the Rockefeller family in America, the family that, John D. Rockefeller established ExxonMobil, which became like a monopoly in the oil industry, an ultra rich family. Some consider it to be the richest family in the history of the world. The Rockefellers, this oil banking dynasty in America, centered around John D. Rockefeller, they are very, very well connected in Britain, and they're constantly going over to Britain. And in Britain, the Rockefellers and a lot of other wealthy British people, they form what's called the Neo-Malthusian Society. They're Neo-Malthusians. Now, what is Neo-Malthusianism? It's a little bit different. Robert Thomas Malthus just had this theory that the population grows faster than the food supply. But Neo-Malthusianism took it to a whole nother level. And it said the problem of glut and the problem of overproduction, the cause of the economic instability of capitalism during these years, because every couple of years, around this turn of the century, 1900, every couple of years, there would be a panic on the stock market. People would lose their jobs. There'd be hunger in the streets. The cause of all of this, according to the Neo-Malthusian Society and the Rockefellers, was overpopulation. And if we just reduce the population, we just cull the herd and reduce the amount of people in the world, why we can stabilize the world economy. And the Neo-Malthusians were very clear and very adamant that their main opponent was Marxism. Marxism said the problem was capitalism, and they insisted, no. The problem is just overpopulation. It's just man's drive to procreate. And that was the Rockefeller worldview, right? Whereas Marxists generally said that capitalism and the drive to make profits and the irrationality of the market was the problem. The Malthusians said, no, growth itself is the problem. The drive to produce more wealth is the problem. The drive to reproduce and increase the population is the problem. It's human beings and their constant drive for more, their desire to expand. That's the problem. And if you read Marx's theories of surplus value, and you read what was written by Rosa Luxemburg and others, there was a very clear distinction between Marxism and Malthusianism. Malthusian economics said growth is bad. We don't want the population to expand. We don't want living standards to go up. Growth is inherently bad, and we can stabilize the capitalist economy and make the economy work better and have prosperity if we just stop growth. That's the Malthusian worldview. Marx's worldview was very, very different. And, I come on here night after night because I know too much. All right. I mean, I think there's an old, There's an old 1950s spy movie, The Man Who Knew Too Much. I know too much, right? I know too much. I wish, part of me, I guess, wishes I could unknow this, but I don't really wish I could unknow it. I just know it. And I studied during the 2008 financial crisis. I as a young man, I was angry about Bush and the Republicans. I was angry about growing up in a conservative area. I had a more global worldview because my parents had taken me. I'd been to Ecuador with my dad in 1999, and I'd traveled around the world, and I'd read world history. I was very frustrated with the conservative environment I grew up in. So I was attracted to communism, but I didn't really understand it as a young man. I was attracted to red flags. I was attracted to rebellion. I was angry at the society I lived in. I was angry at people around me not questioning things. But I didn't really understand Marxism. And in fact, I got involved with a communist group that we're going to talk a little bit about later tonight. And they didn't really understand Marxism either. They loved the red flags. They loved Mao. But it wasn't really until 2008 to 2010 that I got to really understand Marxist economics. Because in 2008, I was a college student. And just as I was getting ready to go out in the world and finish college, the U.S. economy tanked. The U.S. economy crashed, right? I lived in Cleveland. My bank was National City Bank. And the national headquarters of National City Bank turned into an abandoned, empty building. I remember looking at National City Bank, and all the windows were boarded up, and the lobby was cleared out, and it was the national headquarters of the bank that was my bank, and it was empty. It was a shell, hollow building. And, the U.S. economy crashed. And the Marxist group that I was in, the Workers' World Party, they had a lot of flaws, but one thing that they got right was that they decided it was their job to educate the membership about why the 2008 financial crisis had happened. And their leader at the time was a guy named Fred Goldstein, and he wrote this book, which is not a small book, which I read, Low Wage Capitalism. All right. In this book, Low Wage Capitalism, Colossus with a feet of clay, what the new globalized high-tech imperialism means for the class struggle in the US, and that was meant to be kind of a follow-up to another book that had been written, back in the 1980s called High Tech, Low Pay by Sam Marcy. And there was another book that I read during these years, which was by Nelson Peary. It was called The Future is Up to Us. A Revolutionary Talks Politics with the American People is also very good. There's another book that I read during these years that was called Fascism and Social Revolution by R. Palm Dutt. There's another book that I read during these years, which was called Socialism, Utopian and Scientific by Frederick Engels. There's another book that I read many years later, which makes very similar arguments. It's called Dialectical Economics by Lynn Marcus, also later known to the world as Lyndon LaRouche. And based on reading all this stuff, I understood the Marxist critique of capitalism and why the 2008 financial crisis happened. The 2008 financial crisis happened because of the fact that capitalism is the only system in history that has ever had a situation where poverty is created by abundance, where more wealth is produced and technology makes it easier to produce wealth than ever before, but yet people get poorer. That makes no sense. That's not rational. If technology increases and the ability to produce wealth gets greater, why then everyone should be wealthier? But no, right? And it's the first system where people became homeless because there were too many houses, where people became hungry because there was too much food. And there's the old coal miner's riddle that they used to tell. Little boy says to his father, "Why is it so cold?" And the father says, "Because I can't afford any coal to heat the stove." And he says, "Why can't we afford any coal to heat the stove?" He says, "Because I lost my job at the coal mine. I've been laid off." He says, "Why have you been laid off from your job at the coal mine?" He says, "Because there is too much coal." Self-driving cars should be a great thing. But yet, we saw in the New York Times, Andrew Yang pointed out that if they introduced self-driving cars, there'd be riots in the streets. We'd have millions of truck drivers, millions of Uber drivers, millions of state highway patrolmen, millions of traffic court employees, millions of taxi drivers out of work. What sense does this make? Technology leads to more efficiency, because the amount of human labor power that is involved in producing wealth decreases. And so more wealth is created. So why in our system does that lead to an economic catastrophe? And in fact, if you look at the history of capitalism, great economic crises come after great technological leaps. You look at the Great Depression, it came after great advances in industrial production, assembly line production, Taylorism, Fordism. You look at the First World War, it came after a number of crazy panics on the stock market that were brought on by technological advancements that were happening in the early parts of the 20th century. And that the problem with capitalism, as is laid out by Frederick Engels, as laid out by Marx, by Fred Goldstein, by Sam Marcy, by Lynn Marcus, the problem of capitalism is that human creativity and human technological advancement leads to a situation where the irrationality of production organized for profit is outstripped by human creativity. Human creativity and human ability to advance, to master our environment, to recreate our relationship with nature, to change the world around us and produce wealth, it can't be contained by the narrow limits of production organized based on how much a private capitalist, a private owner can make money. And the narrow limits of the capitalist system become an impediment. And there becomes, I think Frederick Engels talked about how there's a wall that gets created with huge amounts of wealth that's produced and huge amounts of people that are in need, but there's a wall between them because the wages that would be paid to the workers so they could buy the wealth aren't being paid out. Right. And glut, G-L-U-T, glut, is a built-in problem of the capitalist mode of production. And every few years, the capitalist economy crashes due to glut. And in fact, they've invented all kinds of crazy mechanisms to try and deal with this problem. And the US government spends money like crazy to deal with this problem. We spend money on the military, buying all kinds of bombs and tanks and weapons. That's to keep the economy going. And keep corporations making money and selling products when the market can't facilitate it. They call it military Keynesianism. The Department of Agriculture, they buy loads and loads of cheese and they bury it in a cave. Read about the Springfield, Missouri cheese cave. And they buy millions of dollars worth of cheese and they bury it in a cave in Missouri just to keep the price of dairy high enough that all the farms don't go out of business. There's many, many examples of this, of the government pumping money into the economy just to keep it going. The Federal Reserve System was invented. Was it invented by communists? No. The Federal Reserve System was invented by some of the wealthiest capitalists as a way of stabilizing the economy. J.P. Morgan got all of his Wall Street banker buddies together on Jekyll Island, and they invented a private corporation facilitated by the government called the Federal Reserve that would pump money in and out of the economy to try and deal with this problem. This problem is ever present in the capitalist mode of production. And when there's a great technological leap, it tends to be followed by a long-term economic crisis. And this is the built-in problem of capitalism. And the understanding that Karl Marx had, that he puts forward in the Communist Manifesto, that Frederick Engels put forward in Socialism, Utopian, and Scientific, the understanding that Karl Marx and Frederick Engels had, as repeated by all those books I just showed you, is that in order to overcome this irrationality, society needs to centralize the instruments of production. The banks, factories, and industries need to be organized to serve public good and not the profits of a wealthy few. And that if we had banks and oil wells and factories and big box stores and centers of economic power that were not operating in order to make profits for private owners, but were functioning according to an overall central plan, then we wouldn't have this problem of poverty created by abundance, and human efficiency and technology could just keep advancing, and more wealth could be created. And, we would overcome this irrationality, and our ability to produce wealth would just exceptionally expand. And with the centralization of the instruments of production, with a government that worked in the interests of society overall, not just the rich and powerful, we could unleash productive forces and create so much wealth that basically the need for a government would fade away. There wouldn't be any crime. Everyone would pretty much be equal because there was enough to go around for everybody. And we could build a world of vast abundance and total freedom, where the fulfillment of every individual is the fulfillment of all, right? The idea is that with rational control of the means of production, the irrationality of capitalism and the restraints, the artificial restraints on human creative power based on the irrationality of the market and the profit system could be overcome, and that human beings could advance toward a stateless, classless world. That's what Marx wrote about. And that's what he actually advocated. Now, the problem with Marx is that, that economic vision that I just laid out is very much contrary to the spiritual understanding that Marx had. At the same time that Marx was laying out that economic vision, he was also at the same time laying out, the spirit of the age, which was the spirit of the French Revolution, the spirit of rebellion. And he waved the red flag. Red is the color of blood and passion and vengeance and sex. If you wave red in the face of a bull, he gets really mad and charges, right? And Marx was talking about how he wanted ruthless criticism of all things in existence. And he said, there is no God, there is only matter, and matter is defined by conflict, dialectical materialism. Marx had this whole spiritual worldview that seemed to be a celebration of chaos, rebellion, and destruction. But his economic theories called for the opposite. They were saying that basically capitalism is creating chaos, what he called the anarchy of production, the chaos of the market. And that what we need is rational planning, centralization of the means of production so that we can have abundance and wealth for everybody. So economically, Marx is calling for more stability and more order, but politically, he's calling for more rebellion and chaos. And it seems that Marx was very much, he was of two minds. There was one Marx that wanted to tear everything down and unleash chaos and rebellion. There was another side of Marx that wanted order and stability and was critiquing the Western system for not having order and stability. And there were a lot of people in Marx's time that were calling for some kind of socialist society. And Marx defined himself by saying the way we're going to get a socialist society is by the labor movement. The workers in the factories are rebelling against their bosses, against the factory owners. And it'll be the labor movement and the rebellion of the wage worker against the employer that will bring socialism into the world. The class struggle. That was the Marxist worldview. This is what Marx taught. And it took me years to learn this because they don't teach it to you. When I was in school, what I learned is that Karl Marx was this guy who thought it was unfair that some people have more money than other people. And so he wanted a government that made everyone equal, right? And in communism, everyone gets paid the exact same wage, no matter how hard they work. That's what I learned in school. I learned this in 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade. Communism is about making everyone equal and equality of income. And it doesn't work because there's no incentive to work because you won't get any more money. And that's why the Soviet Union collapsed, and everywhere that's ever had communism, it's been poor and starving and miserable because communism just doesn't work because people need incentive and you can't make everyone equal. That's what I was taught communism is. That's not what communists believe at all, right? In fact, Marx wrote a whole pamphlet called Critique of the Goethe Program, where he says, I'm not interested in redistributing income. I'm interested in changing how the means of production function, right? And that you will not find the phrase income inequality in Marx's writings anywhere. He wasn't talking about everyone getting paid the same. He was talking about changing the way the banks, factories, and industries work and having them work for the benefit of society. He was talking about public control of the means of production, centralizing the means of production to overcome these problems. And he documented the problem of overproduction and value crisis, the tendency of the falling rate of profit. That's what he spent his time doing. But I learned this caricature. I was told in school, communists believe in share and share alike. I've never read that in anything that Marx or any of the communists ever wrote. They never said share and share alike. They believed everyone should share everything and everyone should get paid the same. And that's stupid. That's retarded. Duh, that wouldn't work. You'd have to be an idiot to believe that, and it's this arrogance, right? The anti-communism of America is very, very arrogant, right? All these millions of people who died fighting for the Chinese Communist Party, all the millions of people who died fighting for the Soviet Union, they were all just so dumb that they couldn't realize that everyone can't get paid the same wage. Duh. Human nature. And that's what they always tell you, human nature, right? And everyone who's against communism then talks to you about human nature, right? And they all think it's like their own original argument. Well, I used to be a communist, but then I discovered human nature. Oh, shut up. That's like, we all learned that. Like 2 seconds after you first hear the word communism in school, they tell you, and it doesn't work because of human nature. And it's a complete non sequitur. And it's taken me years to actually learn and study. And it was 2008 financial crisis. I finally really learned what Marxism actually was. It was this understanding of the irrationality of the capitalist mode of production. It was this understanding that if we centralize the means of production, we can have a huge amount of wealth and society can be lifted up and we won't have this problem of poverty created by abundance, poverty amid plenty. That's what Marxism is. And how is this related to Earth Day? It's very much related to Earth Day because now if you listen to socialists, Bernie Sanders. What is one of Bernie Sanders' slogans that he uses everywhere? He says, I want to abolish billionaires. Abolish billionaires. Now, what does that have to do with centralizing the means of production? Billionaire is an amount of wealth. It's an amount of personal wealth that a person owns. And in fact, the point of centralizing the means of production is to rationally organize the economy so everyone gets wealthier because the economy functions rationally. So if we're saying, no, there's a certain amount of wealth that no one should have, that's not Marxism at all. In fact, Marxism wants everyone to be so wealthy that the state itself can fade away. And so that doesn't make any sense. And then, you get a lot of people that say, well, socialism is just a worker cooperative. It's just a worker cooperative, right? It's that if the workers are shareholders in the company, then they're not being exploited by their employer, and the worker and the employer, the wage worker and the employer, the relationship is not equal. And so if we make worker cooperatives that function according to profits, that sell products on the market, that compete with other worker cooperatives, that function according to what is most profitable, but the profits are shared, we get over the problem. Well, no, you don't, because they're still competing with other worker cooperatives. They're still trying to produce as many goods as they possibly can. They want those it to cost as little as they possibly can to produce those goods. The fewer workers in the cooperative, the bigger the share of every employee is going to be. So they're going to want to hire as few people as possible, so they all get a bigger share. Like, you're not overcoming any of the problems of capitalism except the inequality between the employer and the employer, but you're not addressing the problem of labor being replaced by technology. You're not addressing the fact that profits, the drive to make profits, motivates people and incentivizes bad things like prisons for profit. And, it's not anti-capitalism at all. Cooperative capitalism is still capitalism. You're not centralizing and rationally planning the means of production. And everywhere you go nowadays, suddenly it's okay to talk about Marxism. I remember when I was a kid, it was completely taboo to talk about communism. Communism was evil. Communism had failed everywhere. The Soviet Union had fallen. And so it was just completely taboo. But now all of a sudden it's okay to talk about Marxism in the United States, except the people who talk about Marxism are not preaching Marxism. They're preaching Malthusianism. I'm not making this up. Michael Moore made a film called Planet of the Humans. And in that film, he said the problem with capitalism is growth. In capitalism, people just want more and more and more, and they just want more than they already have, and they want growth. Well, that's not Marxism. That's Malthusianism, folks. The idea that growth is the problem, that is Malthusianism. The idea that we want to reduce the population, we want to reduce the amount of consumption, that's the problem. The way to stabilize the world is to reduce growth, to stop growth. That's not Marxism. Marxism is centralize the means of production so that we can have unlimited growth, no longer held back by the restrictions of technology and capitalist irrationalism. That is the Marxist argument. And the idea that growth itself is bad, and that human population expansion is bad, and that human beings wanting to have a better life and lift themselves up out of poverty and not live without electrification and without running water and not live in poverty is a bad thing. That's called Malthusianism. But what people think is Marxism, that is everywhere all across America right now, is Malthusianism, right? And in fact, that's one of the main reasons that conservative people don't like Marxism, right? Is they say, I don't want to just, they look at these young people that are Bernie Sanders supporters, and they see them as potheads, and they see them as bitter and resentful, and they see them as saying, fuck this country, I want some free stuff. And they say that's not a good attitude to have. The attitude is that you should work hard and want to achieve your dreams, that America is all about achieving your dreams and working hard. And they see in the young people cynicism, pessimism, and bitter jealousy, resentment, and that they're mad that somebody has more than them. And they want things handed to them for free. None of those things are critiques of real Marxist economics. All of those things are critiques of what young leftists and socialists believe. And a lot of what those young leftists and socialists believe, especially the climate hysteria, especially the belief that the problem with capitalism is it creates endless growth, a lot of what they believe is Malthusian. They believe growth is bad. They believe there's too many people in the world. They believe they should just get free stuff and be able to just, screw this and smoke weed and sit around and not do anything. I mean, yeah, all that stuff is bad, and that is called Malthusianism. And in fact, the ultra rich, the richest of the rich, the World Economic Forum, those kind of people have been Malthusian for a long time. And in fact, they've got all kinds of Malthusian schemes that they have developed, like, you'll live in a pod and you'll eat bugs and you'll own nothing and you'll be happy about it. And they're trying to drive down the birth rate. And in Canada, they've developed a program where they kill you. They kill people voluntarily, right? Government medical assistant end to life. And that Malthusianism is everywhere, and people think it's Marxism, and people that think they're Marxists are actually Malthusians. This is a problem. Well, I think it's related to the fact that on Lenin's 100th birthday, they created Earth Day, the message of the environmental movement. And this is where it gets tricky. I'm not saying climate change isn't real. I mean, I think it's very possible that human pollution contributes to the climate being changed. That fossil fuels contribute to climate change. I don't deny that. And I mean, things like the Clean Air Act really did make a difference. I'm not opposed to environmentalism. In fact, the way I understand environmentalism is that one of the problems is that we use our natural resources like water, like air, like minerals, fossil fuel. We use them in a not centralized and planned way. We use them in a very short-term way based on what is going to make short-term profits for corporations. And we're not rationally planning out how we use our resources, right? And that corporations working in their short-term interest pollute the river, because they make money off of it and they don't care about the other people who are affected by it. They're considered an externality, right? The basic argument of the environmental movement is a good one. However, most of the prevailing environmental institutions, like the Sierra Club, like the World Wildlife Association, which was created by the British royal family, what they believe is a Malthusian critique. They think growth is bad. They think human beings are a cancer on the earth. I believe it was a member of the British royal family and one of the founders of the World Wildlife Association, World Wildlife Federation, actually said that he wished he could be reincarnated as a deadly virus that would kill off the human population in order to bring Mother Earth back into balance. And this worldview that says human beings themselves are the problem, this anti-human philosophy is everywhere, and it is funded by the richest of the rich. Was the view of the Rockefellers back in the 1800s, early 1900s. It was the view of Malthus in the 1700s, and it is the view of the ultra-rich today. They want to stay at the top of the world forever, and they have determined that the only way they can do that is to end growth and progress. And they spelled it out. When Biden was running for president, he wrote an essay where he said America must lead again. And in it, he basically said the problem with China is they're building power plants all over Africa, and that's bad for the environment. And, we just got to stop growth around the world. We got to stop growth around the world because growth itself is bad. And that the ultra rich have thought that for a long time. And the people who think that are the bankers, right? And that's the thing, right? If you read Imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism, Lenin talked about how the rise of capitalism in its imperialist monopolistic stage was that industrialists, were replaced by bankers. Bankers became dominant over industrialists, and bankers, financiers, have a different relationship to the question of growth than industrialists do. An industrialist, a guy who owns a factory, he wants to pay his workers as little as he can get away with, but he also needs to sell his products. And if people can't buy his products, he goes out of business. So a financier, his economic interest is in society becoming wealthier so that more people can buy his products, so that he can invest and make even more products. That's how an industrialist operates. He's bad to his own workers, and there are still gluts of overproduction. It still has all the problems of capitalism, but basically an industrialist, it's in his interest for society to become wealthier. Not true for a banker, because the poorer society gets, the more people need to borrow from the banker. And in fact, the poorer and poorer society becomes, the more people turn to the banker, and the more desperate they are to get money from the banker, and the more the banker can charge in interest, usury. Every major religion in history Christianity, Islam, Judaism, as forbid the lending of money at interest. Why? Because money that is made from lending money, interest, that's money that's just created by money. It's money that is created simply by money existing. It is sterile. It is wealth created with no physical value added to society. No physical wealth has increased, and Marx wrote about it. He called it fictitious capital. Fictitious capital is the term that Marx used, but the Catholic Church called it usury. Islam calls it ribald. I mean, all throughout human history, people have said usury is not good because it leads to a whole bunch of fake wealth existing. And fake wealth piles up in the hands of a few people, and society overall gets poorer and poorer and poorer, and you have more and more fake wealth. And that's what happened in the 2008 financial crisis, right? What was going on in the 2008 financial crisis? America was getting poorer. Wages were going down. The good paying industrial jobs were gone. And Wall Street had figured out a whole bunch of derivative ripoffs and speculative wealth where they were just getting wealthier and wealthier and wealthier. And society was getting poorer and poorer and poorer. And the actual physical economy and the actual productive economy of the USA was going down. And Wall Street figured out a whole bunch of derivative ripoffs and maneuvers that they could make. And they just kept making more money. And society was getting poorer. And pretty soon that gap between the actual wealth of society and the fake wealth that's being generated by a gambling casino, it gets to be so big that eventually there's a correction. And the economy comes crashing down and everyone loses their jobs. And that's what happened in 2008. And bankers, right? Bankers are different than industrialists. And the bankers of this world have determined the only way they can stay at the top is to just drive down the population. There's just too many people in the world. And so the Malthusian worldview is fundamentally anti-human. The Marxist worldview, as much as Marx had a spiritual problem, spiritually, dialectical materialism, whatever, but in his economic theories, he was very pro-human, right? He believed that he understood human beings were the only species that had the ability of reinventing their relationship with nature, rising to a higher mode of production, reinventing social relations in the process. And he believed in human beings' creative power, and he wanted society to adjust so we had a state and an economic system that allowed human labor to continue soaring to higher and higher planes. That's what he understood. He understood and he believed in human beings. He wanted the population to go up because he saw human labor power and human creativity as the source of all wealth. So he wanted more people in this world. And he wanted to rationally organize the economy so more and more people could be born, so more and more wealth could be created, and we could all live in great abundance. That's the Marxist economic theory. And the Malthusian worldview is that human beings themselves are the problem, and that there's nothing really wrong with capitalism. There's nothing really wrong with a small group of people owning all the banks, factories, and industries and making lots of wealth off of everybody else. The problem is just there's too many poor people. And if those goddamn poor people would stop wanting more money, wanting more, and wanting higher wages and wanting a better life, and if those people in Africa would stop wanting roads and bridges and electrification, and if those working class people would stop wanting cars to drive and stop wanting houses to live in and stop having children and reproducing, why everything would be fine. Everything would be in balance, right? That's the Malthusian worldview. That is not the Marxist worldview. But that is the worldview that is primary among environmental activists. Why? Because somebody's got to pay for it, right? And environmental activism is largely funded by big foundations that get their money from Wall Street, that get their money from wealthy bankers. And it's the British royal family that funds the World Wildlife Federation. And it's big oil companies that fund the Sierra Club. And if you want to be an environmentalist, you got to have somebody to write you grants to do your environmental activism. And that somebody tends to be wealthy bankers and monopolies. And a great example of this is nuclear power, right? If you're an environmentalist and you're against the use of fossil fuels, you should love nuclear power. Nuclear power is way better for the environment than burning coal, than burning oil. It's way better for the environment, right? Produces some nuclear waste, but other than that, it's pretty good. You're producing some nuclear waste, but you're getting way more electricity for it. And, the environmental movement should be all in favor of nuclear power. And they were back in the 70s. In fact, environmentalists were the biggest advocates of nuclear power because they said it's way, and we're not burning coal, we're not burning oil, we're getting way more electricity for it. And in fact, the nuclear power company of France, they were actually created by a communist. It was a communist party member who started the nuclear power company. In France, the government of France built all kinds of nuclear power companies. And France even worked to help other countries develop nuclear power. And France and Saddam Hussein's government in Iraq teamed up, and French scientists went to Iraq and started helping Saddam Hussein build nuclear power plants. And that nuclear power was something the environmental movement originally supported. But then big oil came along with lots of money and said, boy, we can't really fund you and fund your activism if you think that. And there was a big shift. Big oil started writing checks to environmental activists. And over the course of the 1970s, all of these environmentalists suddenly discovered that nuclear power was the most dangerous thing that ever existed. Nuclear power was the most awful thing. And on top of that, nuclear power, I mean, you do get the nuclear waste. There were incidents like 3 Mile Island, like Chernobyl, and nuclear power is not perfect. It has its problems. There are certainly dangers associated with it. But fusion energy is much more safe than nuclear power. And if we could get fusion energy, why all the dangers associated with nuclear power would be gone, and we'd have way more electricity. And that's why China is getting helium-3, this rare earth element from the moon, and China is doing amazing things in terms of fusion energy. But yet, fusion energy research is largely something that the West is opposed to. Why? Well, if fusion energy research spells the end of the world being run by oil, the people who run the world are the oil bankers, right? It's oil. Big oil bankers are the people who run the world. Right? If you look at Wall Street, right? What's one of the biggest Wall Street banks? Chase Bank. And who owns Chase Bank? That's the wealth of 2 giant families. The first is the Rockefellers, Standard Oil, ExxonMobil. The second is the Morgans, JP Morgan, General Electric. General Electric and ExxonMobil are now a giant bank called Chase Bank. JP Morgan Chase Manhattan Bank. That's who they are. On top of that, you got another really big bank. It's very, very big. It's based in London. And it's funny, it's based in London, this bank, but yet what is it called? It's HSBC Bank, and it's based in London. But what does HSBC stand for? HSBC, and it's based in London. It's called the Hong Kong Shanghai Banking Corporation. Why in the world is there a bank in London called the Hong Kong Shanghai Banking Corporation? Shouldn't that bank be in China? Well, that's because the British Empire used to control China, and the British Empire set up a bank to control China, and it was called the Hong Kong Shanghai Banking Corporation. And what is the Hong Kong Shanghai Banking Corporation? It's British Petroleum, BP, the other big oil company. And on top of that, you got Royal Dutch Shell. Royal Dutch Shell. Does that sound like it's a company that started in the developing world? Does that sound like a country? Royal Dutch Shell. It's the property of a European royal family. Royal Dutch Shell, right? It's created by a royal family, by a colonizer, imperialist Western country, right? So you got BP, Chevron, Shell, and ExxonMobil, the 4 major oil companies. That's the big banks. Oil is what our world runs on right now, right? You get in a car, oil. You fly an airplane, oil. You have anything plastic, all your credit cards, everything, plastic. There's plastic on everything. Plastic is created by oil. Oil is everywhere. Our world runs on petroleum, oil. And the oil market is cornered by Western monopolies, big corporations in the West that dominate the oil markets. And if humanity were to rise to a higher plane and get off of oil, they wouldn't be in charge anymore, right? And China can make nuclear power way better. China's doing great breakthroughs in fusion energy. The rare earth elements that go into electric cars, that go into computer chips, the market is cornered by China. If the world gets off of oil, Wall Street in London and the Western colonizers won't be in charge anymore. And so they're desperate to say, we need to stay on oil forever. We just need to use less of it. Plus, supply and demand. The less oil that's on the market, the price of oil goes up. All right? This war in Iran is very, very good for oil companies. Why? Because it's created oil scarcity. The Straits of Hormuz are closed. Oil that should be coming out of Iran and coming out of Saudi Arabia and coming out of Oman and coming out, and it ain't coming. and there's less oil on the market. So the oil that is on the market now has become way more valuable. Plus, Iran, a major oil exporting country, is not exporting much oil because they're in the middle of a war. Their ports are barricaded by the United States. And so everyone who was buying oil from Iran now has to buy it. This is great for oil companies. Oil scarcity has long been the goal of the big four super major oil companies. And this is something that a lot of people don't understand. They think, well, oil companies want there to be more oil. Not necessarily, right? Maybe if they control it and they make money off of it, sure, but not if their competitors have it. And in fact, the less oil there is on the market, the more valuable their oil is, right? The frackers, the fracking cowboys, they called them. They were major competitors with Wall Street and ExxonMobil and BP and Shell and Chevron. And it was big oil that largely worked to get fracking outlawed in America, because fracking was oil on the market that made their oil less valuable, but also they didn't own it. It was Noble Energy and companies like that that owned it. And so they were losing money. It was oil somebody was buying from somebody else, right? And oil scarcity has long been the goal, going back to the Carter administration. That was the goal, was to reduce the world's oil supply, make oil much more expensive so they make more profits off of it, and keep the world on oil indefinitely, just reduce the amount of it. And the environmental movement largely pushes that notion, the notion of overpopulation, the notion that we just need to consume less, we need to, spend less, we need to have less, gas needs to be more expensive, and we just need to use less of it because it's bad for the environment. That is big oil, and that's the way Wall Street is trying to artificially keep its grip on the planet by at this point, keeping us on oil forever and keeping the world poor. And humanity is not going for it. And there are countries all over the world that have broken out of the Western system and are building and developing. And that is something they can't have. And so the 100th anniversary of Lenin's birth comes along in 1970, April 22nd, 1970. And the US government sponsored huge environmental rallies that took place in all the major cities. As a result, on what should have been celebrations of the 100th anniversary of Lenin's birth, we instead got big rallies for environmentalism, which is a cause that at that point was starting to become dominated by big oil. But it gets even more interesting. And this is like a tangent that is interesting. So in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, big city, the first Earth Day, they had a huge rally. And the guy who got the gig to be in charge of it was a guy named Ira Einhorn. And in fact, Ira Einhorn was listed in the Village Voice and other places as the man who invented Earth Day. Now, many people say he didn't actually invent it. He was a big bragger, but he got lots of money. Ira Einhorn was a guy who lived in Philadelphia, who was a very well-known hippie. And his nickname was Unicorn, because Einhorn means one horn in German. So he called himself Unicorn. And everyone knew this big hippie who lived in Philadelphia, whose name was Unicorn. And he was the guy who started Earth Day, according to himself. Other people claim he didn't start it, but he was the master of ceremonies at the Philadelphia Earth Day in 1970, the first Earth Day. He was this very, very well-known environmentalist, hippie activist in the city of Philadelphia. And he was just well-known, and he had a following, and he did environmental protests, and he made quite a bit of money doing it. And he was quite wealthy, and he was sponsored, I believe, by the Seagrams family, which is a wealthy family. Was it the Seagrams family? Is that who sponsored it? One of these wealthy families from Canada that do alcohol, that are in the alcohol business, they sponsored him. And he was just this well-known environmental activist in Philadelphia. And his girlfriend disappeared. He had a girlfriend, and she disappeared. And all the girlfriend's friends and family were like, where is she? And then his apartment started smelling really bad. Yeah, you can kind of guess where this is going. His apartment started stinking, and his girlfriend was missing. And so the police came into his apartment, and they found that he had mummified his girlfriend's body and that he had murdered his girlfriend. And he was known as the Unicorn Killer. So he was arrested. And, he was facing the death penalty in Pennsylvania, charged with murdering his girlfriend. And the entire political establishment of Philadelphia came to support him. Members of city council, elected officials, others, they said he's not a flight risk. give him bail. They gave him bail for like hundreds of thousands of dollars. A member of a very, very wealthy family in Canada paid his bail, and then he vanished. He vanished, was gone. And for decades, they couldn't figure out where he'd gone until 2007. And in 2007, they found him living in Paris, in France, not in Paris, but in rural France. He'd been living under a different name, and he'd been hiding in France for decades. And so the US government tried to extradite him from France, and the French government put up a fight like you would not believe to prevent him from getting extradited back to the United States. And the state of Pennsylvania actually passed a special law, which is that if you are charged with murder and you flee to France and you get extradited back from France, you can't get the death penalty in Pennsylvania. They passed a special law, and at that point, France couldn't not send him back. And so finally, after like an extradition fight that went on year after year, they extradited him back to the United States. And at his trial, he said he did not kill his girlfriend. He said the CIA did. And then he went into great detail and read into the record all kinds of stuff about CIA, brainwashing programs, mind control, hypnosis. And it appears, I do believe he did kill his girlfriend. However, it appears that he had a huge amount of knowledge about CIA programs, and he had been some kind of intelligence asset. And it also appears that French intelligence had helped him flee to France and had enabled him to live in France for a long time. So that whole story, when you talk about Earth Day, right? The Ira Einhorn thing is very, very strange. That's a rabbit hole you can investigate. What's even weirder is that before they caught Ira Einhorn, there were true crime documentaries about him on television that basically said where he was living and what passport he was living under. He calls himself this, he lives here, and they just couldn't go get him. It was bizarre. But like on American TV, they're like, yeah, and Ira Einhorn, who probably killed his girlfriend, lives here and lives in Ireland right now, and it looks like he moved to France. They knew exactly where he was for years, and they didn't get him, which is even weirder. And then when they did get him, the French government put up a fight like you wouldn't believe to keep them from. The whole story is very, very, very bizarre. So that's just kind of a side story there about Ira Einhorn and Earth Day and all of that. But the reason I talk about this is because it's an interesting story about Earth Day, but it also points to one of the problems of leftism, which is that anti-growth kind of Malthusian world views and perspectives have become synonymous with socialism and communism in America, and have become synonymous with leftism. And that's just not the reality. You look at what Ibrahim Traore, the great African leader, is doing. He's building, right? He's building hospitals and schools. He's paving the roads. He's building and constructing. You look at what the Chinese Revolution is about. A country that used to be one of the poorest countries in the world is now a global superpower, the second largest economy in the world. It's not about degrowth at all, right? Marxism and Malthusianism are not, they don't line up. Maybe the spiritual dialectical materialist aspect of Marxism could be used for that, but the actual economics of Marxism does not line up with environmentalism. But the first Earth Day being on Lenin's 100th birthday was part of the effort to co-opt and manipulate leftism. And I maintain that. And that is part of the understanding that I've developed, which makes CPI and our understanding quite unique. And I talk about these things, and it's very, very important. And so, the work that we do, we are pro-growth. We celebrate humanity, and we celebrate the rising new economy in the Union of Sahel States, and in China, and in Russia, and Iran, and Venezuela, and all the countries that have broken out of Western domination. Cuba. These countries have had their revolutions to build, right? They broke out of Western domination, and they had 5-year economic plans, and they built the power plants, and they raised their people up, and they paved the roads, and they wiped out illiteracy. It's a struggle to have growth, and that imperialism is degrowth. Imperialism is keeping countries in poverty, preventing them from having their own economy, controlling their own resources, and building up their people. And that the struggle for socialism is a struggle against imperialism. That, it's not the workers versus the bosses. That's what Karl Marx wrote about, right? Marx was writing about the workers versus the bosses, but Lenin came along and said, well, actually, no, it's not going to be the workers versus the bosses. It's actually going to be the colonized people of the world struggling to break out of imperialism so they can have growth. And very exciting, very interesting stuff. And that largely the socialist revolutions that have happened and the anti-colonial revolutions, they're struggles for growth. And now it used to be that the Western imperialists wanted growth in their homelands. They wanted growth in Britain. They wanted growth in France and America. They just wanted to keep the third world poor and degrow the third world. Not anymore. They're bringing the degrowth home. Right. I mean, look at America. The roads are not paved. The water is not properly purified. The living standard is going down. The life expectancy has decreased by 2 years here in America. I mean, they are degrowing America, and they're openly saying we need to have less people. We need to depopulate. And it's a problem. Meanwhile, in the Trump sphere, and this is very interesting, there's a film going around now about the birth rate crisis. Lower level capitalists are very, very worried about the fact that we don't have enough people in the West. Meanwhile, the ultra monopolies are saying we need to have less and less people. And this is the divide. The ultra monopolies and the imperialists that dominate the whole world want there to be less people. The lower level capitalists desperately want there to be more people because they need people to buy their products. And this is the kind of contradiction that creates an opening for us. And that's what CPI has always been about. We want a government of action that fights for working families. We want to have a government that is pro-growth and pro-humanity, that invests in communities. And if you look at our 4-point economic plan, that's what it's about. We need a government of action that will fight for working families, that will inject credit into communities, that will control the banks, factories, and industries so that we can have growth. And we need a pro-growth government. And that it seems like on the left, we have elements that want state Malthusianism. They want the government to forcibly degrow. And on the right, we have austerity. They just want to cut government spending and cut regulations on corporations. And that's going to lead to making everyone poorer as well. Well, we're the force that says we don't want people to be poorer. We want the wealth of society to increase. And the way to do that is to break out of the dying Western colonial order where profits come before people. And that's our perspective. And that's what makes the Center for Political Innovation so unique. We have an anti-imperialist worldview that is pro-growth and pro-humanity. And we have not succumbed to the Malthusianism that kind of defines the Western left at this point. And that started with Earth Day. And so, that's why I just felt like talking about that today. But listen, I've been traveling. I had an amazing time at the African People's Socialist Party plenary. I'm hoping the video can be available soon so you can all see how amazing it was. It was just utterly amazing. This is a group of people that are anti-imperialist and have really worked to build in their community. I mean, you should see what they've done out there in St. Louis. I'd seen Florida already, and now I saw St. Louis. It's amazing what they've done. And they've done it while withstanding an FBI attack. I mean, this is Chairman O'Malley. I have absolute admiration for a brilliant strategist, a brilliant leader who's inspired so many people to build his anti-colonial Pan-Africanist organization. Just absolutely amazing. Before that, I was in Russia. And while I was in Russia, I saw what they were doing in Russia. I met people from the African continent, met people from China, met people from North Korea, met people from all over the rising world. The world is changing. And I'm very excited about everything. And we just have to keep building. And that was one theme that I heard a lot at the African Socialist Party convention, the Uhuru convention, was that we can't be too reactive. At the end of the day, we just have to build our own institutions. We can oppose the injustices. We can protest the wars. We can protest the kidnapping of Maduro. We can denounce the crimes of the government. But at the end of the day, we just have to build our own institutions. And I 100% agree with that. The organization is the most precious thing. And that's what we have to do. And that's the perspective that I bring on here. And that's why the Earth Day stuff is so important. And I hope that you learn something from all of this about what I've been trying to get. And if you just maintain a left perspective, you're not going to understand this. Like I said, for years and years, I didn't get this. I really didn't. And it took me a long time to understand Marxist economics and then to understand why the left doesn't believe in that and all of that. And I actually, look, I'm going to do this. I'm going to put on, this is a video that was recently made by a leader of another communist group in America. And I'm putting it on here not to tear people down or whatever, but because it's important to contrast it, right? I'm on here saying I want a pro-growth government. I want an anti-monopoly government, a government that controls the means of production in order to have economic growth. I'm laying out an economic vision. And this is an organization that until recently, they've started to decline recently, but for a long time, they were one of the main communist groups that you would see in America. They're the Revolutionary Communist Party, the RCP, the Maoists. And this is a video that they put out a couple weeks ago where they explained what they believe in. And I'm just going to show it to you here because I want you to understand how different how different our worldview is from theirs. So this is Sansara Taylor, and she explains, this is her video, why does dictatorship of the proletariat have a bad reputation? Now, what is dictatorship of the proletariat? Dictatorship of the proletariat, my understanding, is the working class government. The idea is the working class comes together, it overthrows capitalism, and establishes a working class government. That's the dictatorship of the proletariat, right? We have the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie of capital now, and the idea is that the working class majority takes control of the state, and then you have the dictatorship of the proletariat. The dictatorship of the proletariat then centralizes the means of production and creates socialism, and out of socialism eventually comes the higher stage of communism. Now, it gets messy because, in most of the countries around the world, it hasn't been a pure dictatorship of the proletariat. In Russia, it was a revolutionary dictatorship of workers and peasants. In China, it was a block of four great classes. That's what the big star on the Chinese flag is for the Communist Party. The four stars is for the workers, the peasants, the urban merchants, and the national capitalists. Four classes brought together for the good of the Chinese nation. So we don't even really have pure dictatorship of the proletariat anywhere in the world, right? We have governments that are anti-imperialist, in which, Marxists, or in some cases non-Marxists like Baathists or the Islamic Revolution of Iran, take power on the basis of opposing the imperialists. We don't really have the pure Marxist dictatorship of the proletariat. But the phrase dictatorship of the proletariat was coined by Karl Marx. It means the working class majority takes control of the governments. This is in Sarah Taylor's video about, why does dictatorship of the proletariat have such a bad reputation? We're just going to go through it. And I'm not on here to call her out and say she's wrong. I'm on here to show you how different her understanding is from everything I just told you. I just spent an hour explaining the difference between Marxism and Malthusianism in the context of Earth Day and all that. So now we're going to watch. This is what one of the major, very visible communist groups, the Revolutionary Communist Party led by Bob Avakian, this is what they believe. And compare this to what I just told you. Not the same thing.
Dictatorship of the proletariat has a bad rap, a bad reputation. I feel like that Joan Jett song. Do people know that song? I don't give a damn about my bad reputation. It's a great song, but I think the part of the thing is...
I'm going to refrain from criticizing any of her presentation style. I could make fun of her for her, pop culture references, but I'm not going to do that because that's not productive. So we'll continue.
Why does the dictatorship of the proletariat have a bad reputation? Is because the people who fear it, the rulers of the systems of exploitation who fear it and hate it, have gone to work to brainwash people about it. And they've lied and lied and lied about it. They lie about it in the schools. They lie about it in the media. They lie about it all the time.
No disagreement. And
they promote people who want to tell their sob stories and horror stories. And look, there were things that were done wrong in these revolutions, but they don't. What was the main thing? What was the main thing that characterized the revolutions in the Soviet Union and in China was radical emancipation. And people need to understand this. The Soviet Union, when it made revolution, was the first country, the first modern country in Europe and way before the U.S. that gave women the legal right to abortion.
False. The Soviet Union outlawed abortion in the early 1930s. Trotsky talked about that in Revolution Betrayed. And again, the main promoters of abortion at this time in the world were the neo-Malthusians, right? And again, there are many, many capitalist countries in this world that have abortion. If that's what you take from the Soviet Union is they legalized abortion, oh boy.
That said women should control their own destinies and lives in that way. This was a country that was like...
not after 1933. Abortion became illegal in the USSR until the 1950s. Then they re-legalized it again. But between like the mid 30s and the 1950s, abortion was actually illegal. Stalin outlawed abortion. So, and again, many capitalist countries have abortion.
Coming out of feudalism and feudal enslavement.
Little known fact. Did you know it's actually easier to get an abortion in Iran than in America? I actually learned that when I was in Iran, right? So in America, the way we do abortion is if you want to get an abortion, you have to go to an abortion clinic, and there are special doctors that have an abortion license. In Iran, any doctor can do an abortion if he feels it is in the woman's interest, if the woman agrees it's in their interest. Now, there's a huge religious stigma. It's technically illegal, but a doctor can do it if he says it's medically necessary. And that's how it is in most countries in the world. In most countries in the world, a doctor can do an abortion if he says it's medically necessary. And it's technically illegal, but if the doctor says it's medically necessary, it can happen. In America, it's legal, but most doctors can't do it. They have to have an abortion license and all that. So it's actually, but yeah, in most countries in the world, you can get an abortion if you want one. It may be technically illegal, but doctors can do it. I mean, so like that's what you take from the Soviet Union is abortion. Really?
And they brought they separated the planting and the harvest seasons from religious holidays and helped people understand more scientifically what they're planting and why, and broke this from the traditions of the church in a big way, the enslaving traditions of the church and the ignorance of that.
They got rid of religious holidays. So now we've gone to, they had abortion and they got rid of religious holidays. This isn't sounding good to me.
These were societies that were surrounded by imperialists, embargoed with the first oil embargo. They were invaded the Soviet Union 14 times, and yet they made very profound transformations. And China did even more so. And it's important when you are learning, when you have vivid experience of human beings by the millions breaking free, people need to know that we've been able to live differently.
Like these are all just kind of vague platitudes. Emancipation, breaking free. Okay, we get it. But so far you've named abortion, which we have in Western countries, and getting rid of religious holidays. I don't know. I don't have an issue with Christmas. I don't have an issue with, well, I don't know what, I mean, so getting rid of religious holidays and abortion, and then vague platitudes about emancipation. So far, anyone who's anti-communist and thinks all these countries were starving and miserable has not yet been convinced. And the abortion thing isn't even exactly true.
They need to know that experience, both because it lifts your sights, China even more so. This was a country where women's feet were unbound. Women were brought into public life, into politics, into production, into education in ways that had never been done. Yes.
That's true.
Overcoming in the Soviet Union did this.
But again, a lot of capitalist Western countries, women can vote and women don't have bound feet. I mean, again, anyone who's not are you thinking about this from the perspective of somebody who thinks that all these countries just people were starving and miserable the whole time? Like, no one's convinced by this.
Who gave languages to, not languages. People had languages, oppressed peoples had languages, but developed written language rather than languages being lost and stamped out by great Russian chauvinism, helped develop.
That's a problem, though, right? And that's actually something that Putin has raised. The Soviet Union, Lenin was obsessed with declaring people to be nationalities, and that there were a lot of people throughout the Russian Empire who spoke a little bit differently, or and Lenin declared them to be nations and arranged for them to have a written language. And Putin has talked about how that was a weakness. That was like, that was a way that the Soviet Union was weakened, was they were constantly emphasizing how they were different and emphasizing the different nationalities. And this talk of great Russian chauvinism, that's Ukrainian shit, right? I mean, that's part of the Ukrainian nationalist narrative, is evil Russia has been oppressing the Ukrainians and all of that. I know that's not what she's saying, but like, okay, so far, so now we've gone from they had abortions, they got rid of religious holidays, and they emphasized national differences. Like, yeah, I'm waiting for the part where anyone who thinks that all they did was starve and be miserable is at all convinced by this.
That's in education and self-rule in people's own languages with their own cultures, overcoming national oppression. There were things that were very radical and emancipating, and like I said, even more so in China. And people need to know this. They need to know it, and if it's been lied about, it's been lied about for a reason. And so we have to go up against those lies. At the same time, people need to know it because we have to learn what was done right, what were the shortcomings, how we do better the next time around. We intend to run a new society. Now, if you were going to do open heart surgery, you would want to look at the previous experiences of doing open heart surgery. You'd want to study how it's done. You wouldn't say, oh, I don't want to look at this failed attempt. I don't want to look at this person who made a mistake and just do open heart surgery without ever learning from it. You want to go into that and say, okay, what was done right? What do we want to build on? What were the errors? And the same thing, we're trying to do something major. We're trying to take humanity on a world scale out of thousands of years of living as masters and slaves into a world where that no longer goes on.
Well, no, we're trying to centralize the means of production to overcome the irrationality of the market, right? And enable society to have abundance and eradicate poverty. I mean, this will develop as we keep watching, but it's like you listen to what they want. it's almost like they've turned communism into, she wants a social justice dictatorship. She has a very left-wing feminist worldview, and she wants a government that imposes that worldview. That's what communism means to her. It's not about economics. It's not about any of all of this stuff I just spent an hour talking about. It's just she believes in abortion, and and she believes in abortion. She doesn't want there to be religious holidays, and she wants a government that like has her opinion on cultural issues and forces it on society.
And so you have these precious experiences where people did make revolution and accomplished a lot, and yes, also made errors in how they went at it. And we want to popularize that, learn about it, and then most of all, let people know what has been learned about how to go at it in a much fuller, more emancipating way the next time around. But I don't think we should give in to the brainwash and the lies of the system.
Let me just add something.
Liberation, even in the U.S., happened in 1819, after 70 years of women like Susan Anthony fighting all those groups. Finally,
1919.
1919 is, 1919.
Yeah.
But Soviet was way before that.
Very much so.
Even that wasn't even.
Yeah, I can't understand what the guy who's not on the microphone is saying. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, and while black people were being lynched in the U.S. South, the Soviet Union was giving special rights to the minority populations of that country, and homosexuality was actually legalized when they made revolution there. So.
Yeah, but then they outlawed it again. That's actually also questionable. I've heard there's some people who actually strongly contest that claim. It was definitely outlawed during the Stalin period. It was legal, according to some reports, immediately after the Russian Revolution, but that's not even clear. I've heard some people dispute that.
Very advanced experience.
So again, so it's like, okay, so what did communism achieve? It gave people abortion. It outlawed religious holidays. It emphasized national differences, and it legalized homosexuals. Like, again, social justice dictatorship. She's not talking about economics. She's not talking about socialism. She's talking about, I want a government that is committed to Democratic Party social values and will impose that on society.
But I did want to say,
and also, until about the 1980s, most communists in the world considered homosexuality to be bourgeois decadence or a disease from capitalism. It wasn't really until the 1980s that shifted. Now, Cuba has gay marriage, but I think Cuba is the only communist country in the world that has gay marriage. So, not to that the video hasn't mentioned anything the USSR achieved that is a great idea that Western capitalist nations have failed to do. Exactly. I mean, it's like her understanding of communism is, well, I'm committed to these kind of left-wing liberal ideas, and I want a government that will force them onto society.
One thing about dictatorship, since it's come up twice now, people often think of dictatorship as the opposite of democracy, right? And one of the points Sansara made at the beginning, after you asked your question, was that we're living in a dictatorship now. And one of the things that people have to understand, and this is one of the big insights that Karl Marx, who was the founder of communism, that he developed, right, is that at the foundation of every society is the economic system, right?
Economics. Wow. Economics. Finally. So the foundation of society is not whether or not they have abortions or whether or not they have religious holidays. It's economics. Wow. How many minutes into this video are we? We're 5 minutes into this video before they start talking about economics. Yes. Economics. Thank you.
And that political systems arise on that foundation.
Oh, so did the Soviet Union have a different economic system? Wow. Wow.
To reinforce that economic system. So if you live in an economic system divided into classes, you can talk about democracy all you want, you can have voting, whatever, but in essence, the class that has the disproportionate control of the economic system is going to have disproportionate control of the of the political system.
Yes, agreed.
And they're going to use that to enforce that economic system. So if you think about, okay, where did, democracy, quote unquote, the rule of the people, where did this first arise? In ancient Greece. What was going on in ancient Greece? Slavery. That was the foundation. That was the economic foundation of that democratic society. And they had voting and they had elections, but it was voting and elections for the slave owners.
Well, so this is where it gets very, very interesting. He's right, but it's more complicated than that. If you read Plato's Republic, right? So ancient Greece, you had city-states, right? Along the Mediterranean, you had city-states, Athens, Sparta, in Africa, you had Carthage, which was in Tunisia. You had these city-states, and these city-states would have a giant army, and they would control an area by having their army go out and provide protection, is what they called it. But they were, basically controlling people with their giant army, and they would control territory, and people in that territory would have to give them so money, give them their crops that they grew, and have to give them their slaves, give them people to be their slaves. And the city-state, all the people, all the men in the city-state went into the army, and they had this giant army, and they controlled an area. And that was the ancient world along the Mediterranean as we understood it. And in those city-states, they generally had a cycle. And in Athens, they talk about it was a cycle. And the cycle went like this. They had a king, and it was a good king, and they called that monarchy. But after a couple generations, they would have a corrupt monarchy. There'd be enough, the next king would get in and, they're entitled, whatever. And so and then when the monarchy became corrupt and you had a ruthless ruler, that became tyranny. So monarchy deteriorated into tyranny. And then out of tyranny would arise, the elite would get together and overthrow the tyrant, the bad king, and they would replace that with oligarchy. And the oligarchy was a good elite that worked in the good of the nation. They would overthrow the tyrant, and they would establish an oligarchy, which was noble elites that would rule. But after a few generations, the noble elites would become corrupt and decadent and selfish, and oligarchy would deteriorate into plutocracy. And plutocracy was the bad oligarchy, right? The corrupt oligarchs. And so then after a little while, then the population would overthrow the oligarch or the plutocracy, and they would establish the republic. And the republic was the good. It was the elected government. It was a government that you voted on. And the republic was good. But after a few generations, the republic would deteriorate into democracy, which was considered to be a bad thing, which was vulgar mob rule. And democracy would get so out of hand that out of democracy, you'd get a king, a monarch would emerge again, and the cycle would start over. And why was it that the city-states, they had democracy, at least some of the time, or elected governments, a republic? Why did they have it? Was because everyone was in the military, and it was through having a big military that would conquer areas. And 90% of the people who lived there were slaves, but among the landowners, they were all in the military. And if you thought that you had a vote, you were much more likely to go out and fight and pillage and plunder other people. But if it was a king at the top, well, you weren't likely to get a share in it. And it was about dividing up the loot. It was about motivating the people to be conquerors. That was ultimately the basis of democracy, was that among the landowners and the slave owners, it was a way to kind of assure them that they would get a share of the loot. They would get one vote. That's basically what it was about. And it was kind of a cycle. So anyway, I mean, he's right in what he's saying, but it's more complicated than that.
Or you think about when, the foundation of this country, we're coming up on the 250-year anniversary this July 4th of the independence of this great American democracy. But what was going on 250 years ago when this democracy was founded? And who were the founders, by the way? They were a bunch of slave owners, the ones who were talking about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, the ones who are, writing the Constitution. They were a bunch of slave owners, most of them.
You're not wrong.
Or big-time capitalists, right? And so, in essence, right, women couldn't vote. At that time, it was only, white men of property could vote. Gradually, they've expanded who can vote.
And that made sense because, you know, the idea was they were the property owners and that democracy, the republic, they called it a republic. Democracy was a vulgar term for mob rule, but the republic, the idea of the republic was it was that all the property owners had a say in how the nation was governed. And then they all had to serve in the military too. And that, you know, I mean, very much the founders of the United States were looking at ancient Greece and the Roman Republic, and they were trying to do their own version of it. In fact, if you go to upstate New York, a lot of the cities have names like Syracuse, right? And, you know, Philadelphia. And, you know, I mean, they were very conscious of the fact they were trying to rebuild something like the Roman Empire. And the most popular book at the time of the founding of our country was the Edward Gibbon's Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire, the 8-volume huge book. And there weren't many books back then. So, you know, I mean, yes, I mean, the founders of the United States were very much trying to imitate the city-states of ancient Greece, where the land-owning, slave-owning elite all had a vote. You know, I mean, that was very much the case.
But yet the actual control of the political system, of the democracy, is still in the hands of this tiny class of capitalist exploiters. So when we're talking about, when Sansara is holding up this constitution and we're talking about a dictatorship of the proletariat, in essence, at the foundation of this system, and what makes it radically different, is that instead of a capitalist economic system, it's a socialist economic system where the wealth is not privately owned by a handful of capitalists, but is
the wealth. Like, most people think that's income. Most people think that's personal resources. They don't think it's the means of production.
Owned and controlled by a socialist government and used to meet the needs of society and the world. And so
most people just heard, I don't get to have any money because my wealth, my bank account is controlled by the government. So far we've got abortions, no religious holidays, and national differences emphasized, and the government controls my bank account. Most people are not going to be convinced by this.
So the political system, it has dictatorship for the reasons that she said. We're going to dictate over the overthrown capitalists. We're not going to let them just like reinstitute capitalism. We're going to dictate to anyone in the world who wants to like try to invade us. We have to have an army to defend this revolution. You know, so that's dictating. That's not just, you know, you have to have force behind it, you know, and there will be laws. It's not like after the revolution, you can just go into your neighbor's house and just take all their shit because you want to. You have to have laws to protect people's rights,
Well, and then people say, but I thought the point was to abolish private property. Everyone's going to be really confused right now, by the way.
Including to protect people's right to protest and to disagree with the government, you know, but there's also a democratic aspect, you know, but it's
On the terms of this system.
there's on the terms of the new socialist system, right? Right now, you know
how far gone this is from everything I just explained on here. Like it's like things are bad right now because people believe in conservative stuff. And so we are going to take over the government. And when we're in charge, it'll be liberal stuff that the government does. And we'll control the wealth. I don't know. I mean, this is...
You have you have rights. You can vote, you can protest, but your rights are all very confined and constrained within the terms of this system. Like, so in the minute this system feels you're a threat, they will come down hard on you. You know,
that is correct.
They murdered leaders of the Black Panther Party or put them in prison just for speaking out and advocating revolution. You know, they've done this over and over and over again.
Yes.
You know, in this country, and you know, even while they say it's a democracy and you have rights. So, you know, one of the points that Bob Avakian has actually made is that in the new socialist system, that there's never been a founding document, not in the United States, not in Europe, and not even in the history of the socialist governments in Russia or China. There's never been a founding document that guarantees as much ability for people to dissent and disagree with the government and put forward their ideas and free speech and all of that. There's never been that much freedom guaranteed and individual rights for people as is in this Constitution. But all of that is on the foundation of a whole different economic and political system.
I mean, I don't even really have to say too much. I mean, you can tell how what that group is preaching is completely different than what I just explained. I mean, and that's why we're not communists, I guess you could say. We're innovationists. I believe that we're holding on to the economic conceptions that I learned in the aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis. But yeah, only mentioned economics 5 seconds, only mentioned the means of production one time. It's just something different. And I think about Earth Day and how Earth Day replaced Lenin's birthday. And I think about all of that. If you really want to read my critique of the RCP line, I do have Letter to Bob Avakian, which, I mean, it's actually, through the art of polemic, you can really learn, the differences in your views. And in this book, I go into great depth. I kind of take apart and I just use extensive quotes from Bob Avakian. I go over the history of his organization and all of that. And I mean, you can see where we disagree, but, I just wanted to show that because it's like that is so different than what we're espousing. I mean, it's like apples and oranges. You would have no idea that there's even a similar foundation, that we even ever read the same books. So I just wanted to throw that out there. But listen, folks, it's late. It's after midnight, so I'm going to do the roll call. And a couple of buy me a coffees have come in, which I think is awesome. And then from there, I'll answer any questions that come in. So yeah, let's do the roll call. Names and locations, folks. Names and locations. I will call you all out as I see you. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. Names and locations. Who is with us? Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. Names and locations. Names and locations. Who is with us? Who is with us? Who is with us tonight? Jane in New Zealand. Anthony in British Columbia. Good to see you. Ryan in Kansas City. Kansas City, here I come. Dan in the Los Angeles area. Penny Arcos in the Coalition of the Canceled. Dare to struggle, dare to win. Penny is awesome, doing great work. So is Dan. So is the LA crowd. So is everybody. I mean, we got a great group of people in CPI. Liverpool, United Kingdom. It's late over there, man. Paul, good to see you, Paul. Great guy. Arlene in Milwaukee. I don't think I've met you yet, Arlene, but I'm sure you're awesome. I need to be careful about complimenting people because if I don't compliment everybody, then it becomes like a snub to some. And I've never met Arlene before, but Anthony in Detroit, good to see you. Names and locations, names and locations. Who is with us? Who is with us? Who is with us? Names and locations, names and locations. Duluth, Minnesota for shops. Good to see you. Good to see you. Good to see you. Names and locations, names and locations. Who is with us? Gabby in Chicago, always doing great work. We always appreciate the work that you do, Gabby. Good to see you. And I believe Fashops is Carter, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong. I've been wrong about things before. Names and locations, names and locations. Who is with us? Who is with us? Anybody else? Names and locations, names and locations. Good to see you. Good to see you all. Names and locations. Oh, it's Carter's brother. Oh, okay. I didn't know your brother was there. It's good to see people from around the country. Absolutely. Always is. A lot of people watch this channel. I had a good chat yesterday morning with somebody who's been watching for years. And, I had never actually had the opportunity to meet them online before. I mean, this channel is viewed by a lot of people. So Diana in Orlando, Florida. Good work, brother Caleb. Well, thank you. I do the best that I can. And, I'm traveling and we got some important work coming up. I mean, we are kind of reorienting for the next couple months, but we're doing good stuff. We got great stuff planned. As an organization, we got some activities coming up here and we're involved in, the next 2 months, we have got a very clear job to do. CPI members should be aware of what that job is. But we've got a big job to do in the next couple of months. And then we've got our national gathering in August. We got workshops coming up at the end of, we got an event in New York City on July 2nd. We got 2 workshops in the month of July. We're doing good stuff. We're building an organization. We're building a movement. We are anti-imperialists. When I was in Russia, I filmed an episode of Tara Reid's new show, East Meets West. Tara Reid and Olga Bataman They have a great show, and they just had, they've had a lot of really prominent guests, and I filmed an episode, and that episode is going to go up on Victory Day, which is very cool. So I hope that you get a chance to see it. It was a really amazing conversation, very wide ranging. I'm very excited about it. We talked about one of my books. You'll be hearing all about it soon. We got some different projects. I went on Jamarl Thomas's show this morning. He is back, which is great. Jamarl Thomas is awesome. And I'm glad, he has had some medical issues, but he's over his medical issues and he's back at full speed, it looks like. So that was great. I was on with him this morning, and we've got some great stuff in the works. I don't want to reveal everything because, you'll see it as it happens, but CPI, we're always going and people are joining all the time. If you want to become a member, go ahead and join and we'll follow up with you. Usually it'll be someone from your area that'll contact you. You'll probably also get our emails. But yeah, exciting things are happening. You talk about the Kim Il-sung flower. I didn't actually talk about it. I gave that pamphlet to a lot of people in Russia, but I don't think we talked about that on the show. But there you go. The Kim Il-sung outreach, though, is very, very awesome. And, shout out to our LA members that were just at the LA Festival of Books doing outreach, doing great work. And shout out to Penny that was hitting the streets of Minneapolis to support brother Ranjit Brar, who's been arrested in Britain for his great anti-imperialist speech. I mean, we're everywhere. We're building an anti-imperialist movement, and we're serious about it. And I appreciate, I'm in great admiration of all that we're doing. We are a movement of people that is really dedicated. I hope that you can make it to our 7-day program, because at the end of the day, I mean, we're building a real movement here. And we would like to connect you to other people that are part of this movement. We'd like you to get to know people like Gabby and Penny and Dan and Noah and others, and we'd like to make you part of this community. So the 7-day program is a great, great way to do that. So I hope you'll join us in Chicago for the 7-day workshop. It's a great way to get to know our organization. Exciting things are happening. All right, so we're going to start answering the buy me a coffee questions that have come in, and then I'm going to go to sleep because my allergies are getting to me. So Richard, while I was traveling, Richard asked me this question. Richard, aka Unanimous, said, why are more young white men becoming anti-black and associating black men with violence? Why do they feel so off-put by Irina Zuritsky? Who is Irina Zuritsky? I don't know who that is. Young white men are falling not just into the anti-Semitic Nazi adjacent stuff. I don't see why China has a firewall when Russia has passed more laws against Nazism and denying the Holocaust. We do need similar laws, some re-education camps. Oh, come on now. Re-education camps, Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't. Okay, so he's expressing a lot of, Irina is the Ukrainian woman who was killed on the train. That's who I would thought it was. But, okay. All right, here's the thing. Richard, I don't think that that's an accurate assessment of where young American white men are at. I think that you are describing Nick Fuentes fans. Nick Fuentes is not a good dude. He's a problem on many levels. It's good that he is raising awareness about Israel and their power. It's weird that he occasionally says kind of good things about Stalin, but not really. But at the same time, I mean, he plays a pretty negative role, and you're describing the racism and stuff, but I'll just say that what's unique about this racism that you're describing is that it used to be that there was much more widespread racism of this type that was not directly stated. And a lot of people didn't think that they were racist, but they thought things like what you're describing. And there has been a big effort by society to push back against that. And so now you have a contrarian element that are, Nick Fuentes fans or whatever, that are just like, I am fully racist. And that is a little bit of a change. The dynamics are changing around it. I wouldn't say that all young white men are becoming like this. I would say that it used to be that all young white men were a little bit like this. And now that has very much been eroded. So now you have a very, very vocal minority that are conscious that they are like this and openly being like this. And I mean, this has been developing. I remember when I was in high school, for example, I went to high school in Ohio. Ohio is not a southern state, but my high school was about 15% black. And they did have a rule. You could not wear Confederate flags because that was offensive, right? And it was, I mean, you couldn't, it was offensive to the black students. And there was a group of young guys at my high school who, would like wear a Confederate belt buckle, but have their shirt over it and like show it to their friends, like, ooh, look how badass I am. And, would talk about Confederate stuff and would make racist jokes because it was like forbidden, and I look back on that and, I think about that and I just, it was almost like how like little kids giggle when they hear bad words because they're not allowed to say them. And that, it's kind of like, people will do things if they are forbidden. And if you don't explain things, that's the biggest problem. They don't actually explain these things. It's just kind of, well, this is something you're not supposed to do. And people kind of resent being given a rule. It's the thing they call counter will, where you don't like being given a rule. You get an element of people that say the bad word because they're not allowed to say it, or embrace the thing they're forbidden from embracing. You get an element of that. Now, what Nick Fuentes is doing is a completely different thing. But I remember that even when I was in high school. That was before Black Lives Matter. That was before anything. I remember when I was in high school at this very conservative town, there was, 4 or 5 kids that I remember that were in the marching band that like made it their thing to be racist because there were rules against being racist at my school that were not ever explained, and they kind of resented it. And I think they grew out of it. I think it was just a phase they were going through. But I remember that incident a lot. I did have a really good discussion with one of them at one point that was interesting because I was sitting on the marching band bus with him. And I remember he got really angry because he was, speaking in a racist way. And he said, well, it's bullshit. They always tell us white people are bad because of the Ku Klux Klan, but nobody ever talks about the Black Panthers. And the Black Panthers had guns and they were killing white people, and no one ever talks about that. And I said to him, I knew enough back then to say that's not what the Black Panthers were. And there were a lot of white people that supported the Black Panthers. Black Panthers were a black liberation organization that fought against police brutality. They had a lot of white supporters. They organized a free breakfast program. And I knew enough. I didn't know that much, but I knew enough at that age. And he was like, really? And he had been told that the Black Panthers were a group of black people with guns who went around killing white people. And I told him, no, that's just not the case. And he was he was taken aback. And I'm really glad I was able to have that conversation with him. And, was he going to learn that in my school? No. Were they going to teach him that in history class? No. So, this was a minor, right? A teenager. I mean, he just didn't know any better. Right. And that and that's the kind of thing, if you impose rules on people, but you don't explain them, there's no education that goes with it. Right. And it's just kind of, you're not allowed to do this because somebody from a different culture, somebody that you don't understand for historical reasons that are never explained is offended by this. People are going to be like, well, I resent that. People are going to be resentful of it. Right. And I mean, it's just like kids want to say bad words, right? If you tell kids you're not allowed to say the F word, they all start whispering the F word to each other. I mean, it's kind of like that. But if you explain these things, if things are given proper context, and if people can actually talk to other people about what their experiences are, things can be a little bit different. But I don't know. I mean, the Nick Fuentes thing is completely different. It's a completely different phenomenon. Nick Fuentes, look, I maintain that this is a widespread operation. It's not just Nick Fuentes. There are other forces that it's like every dissident space gets taken over by social media streamers that are boosted by the government, that just get artificially inflated, and they kind of control the narrative around those dissident ideas, and they gradually get less and less political over time. And that's what happens, right? And I mean, we all know them. Every dissident space, right? Among racists and anti-Israel racists, you have Nick Fuentes. In libertarian spaces, you have certain people. In leftism, you had BreadTube for a long time, and then you have the post-BreadTube. BreadTube is kind of ancient history now, but you have the post-BreadTube, and I was basically, the post-BreadTube was kind of modeled on me. But yeah, I mean, it was, that this is the thing. They kind of blow up these streamers that are not connected to any real organization or any real activism, that are just building an internet fandom, and they blow them up, and then they use their platform to target anyone who's building a real organization. And that happens. And I believe Nick Fuentes is that for the right. And yeah, RIP BreadTube. BreadTube is done. It's over. Nobody cares about Bosch anymore. Nobody cares about ContraPoints. She even made a video in the last year. I mean, nobody cares about BreadTube. It's all over. I think Destiny is still around, but he was never technically BreadTube. He was just an asshole. Just an asshole debater. But BreadTube was like the socialists that were around Destiny or whatever. They're done. It's over. It's over. And we're still here. And that's the crazy thing. There is an element of like slow and steady wins the race. These people get inflated, they get really, really big. And then after a couple of years, they're gone. Whereas we just keep chugging away. We just keep chugging away, and, I think that's true generally for these shock jock types. They serve their purpose. I believe that they find kind of unstable, mentally ill people that they know how to control, or people that can be easily blackmailed. I mean, we knew what Vosh's issue from the beginning was. I mean, I told you all about Vosh, and then he proved it on a stream. He had so little control. He, showed on a stream what he was. And I called him that. I mean, it was out there. People kind of knew that's what Vosh was. For a long time, they knew what Vosh was, but I mean, I said this is probably what Vosh is, and then Vosh revealed it, and I mean, he's still out there. I mean, there's still a group of people that admire him, but no one's paying attention to him, and that's the thing. And it's like, but is that the goal, is to be paid attention to on the internet? No, the goal should be to build a real organization at the end of the day, right? I mean, that's what we want to do. We want to build a real organization. We don't want to be paid attention to. I mean, likes and views on social media don't really matter that much. If it's your primary source of income, which for me has never been the case, I've always had a job, right? But if this is your primary source of income, I can understand why that's important. But, if at the end of the day, that's not the goal, is to be internet famous. The goal is to build a real organization. And if you're building a real organization, you're going to talk a lot different. So anyway, we can talk about different stuff. So, and then ASP rep Geneva said, Uhuru, salute Caleb and John from CPI. Well, thank you. Absolutely. It was really great to see you at the Uhuru thing. And I'm looking forward to getting the video online. It was just a great event. It was just really, really tremendous. And I was really, really glad to be included in that. And to, we will continue standing with Uhuru. I'm headed to Georgia for their court date. So there we go. Now, Fishopes said, what do you think the 2028 Democratic primary will look like? Do you think Gavin will end up as the nominee, as many expect? I actually don't know. I said to Jamarl Thomas this morning, if the Democrats really were serious, I mean, if they really wanted to, this could be their moment, right? They were getting the crap beat out of them by Trump because they proved themselves to be kind of a hollow, mechanical party that nominated Hillary, which nobody wanted, which nominated Kamala, which nobody wanted, which, got Biden to win, kind of, but no one liked Biden. And they could actually nominate a real candidate with charisma. They could actually steal the moment, because Trump has demoralized and disappointed so many of his voters. The Republican Party is so lost, Trump's war and everything. The Democrats could really seize this moment, but they won't, because they have the same problem that Trump has, the Republicans have, that they're tied to the American political establishment. The problem is much deeper than Trump. It's much deeper than Biden. It's much deeper than the Democrats or the Republicans. The problem is the American political establishment. And yeah, the Democrats really could do something right now. I did want to say something. I don't want to get too much into this, but like the Eric Swalwell thing, there's a commentator who, is a friend of Peter Coffin's. She's gone on Fox News before. She's a former Democrat, Evan, and she nailed it. That Eric Swalwell thing was bullshit. And Evan Barker is her name, and she's a former Democrat, and she's very smart and on point, and she was a staffer for the Democrat Party who quit. And she just said that Eric Swalwell thing. Look, Eric Swalwell is awful in many ways. I'm not going to vote for him because I don't agree with him. But what they did to him was ridiculous, right? I mean, the guy had consensual sex, years ago, and all of a sudden they went after him for it. and you look at the details. I mean, they're calling it rape. It wasn't rape, right? I mean, they had a consensual affair for many years and it stopped. And then they went to a bar and got drunk together and had consensual sex. And you look at it and it's just like, without trial, without the victim even being named, he's over. And it's just like, this is insane. And what's crazy about it is Joe Biden sexually assaulted Tara Reid and they swept that under the rug. Oh, well, she likes Putin, so it can't be, and that's insane. Right. But then Eric Swalwell, it's like one of his staffers who admits she'd been having an affair with him for years, who admits they went and got drunk together, who admits they had consensual sex together, now says she was taken advantage of. And you look at it, it's like, I mean, look, folks, this is just becoming the new political reality. All right. And, there may be some people who think this is good. I don't know. I mean, you're allowed to think that if you want. It's just the new political reality. If you are a man, right, and you are becoming politically outspoken, inevitably they will find somebody that you have done something consensual with who will come forward and announce that they have been victimized by you. And that's just how this works. Right now, rape is rape. It's pretty clear what rape is. Sexual assault, unwanted touch, sexual assault, that's very clear what that is. But consensual stuff, that's a whole nother ball game, right? That's a whole nother ball game. That doesn't mean that people are blameless, right? Obviously people can use poor judgment. Obviously people can do things, but rape is rape. Sexual assault is sexual assault. But when things are consensual and people are adults, right? Obviously not children. Things between consenting adults are a completely different ballpark. And, I know people that are victims of actual rape who are very, very offended by the Me Too movement because they're like, what I experienced was very, very different than my boss asking me to go out to lunch and being creepy. But on the internet, if they accuse you of one thing, you're guilty of all of it, right? If you, and I've seen stuff with streamers now that is getting ridiculous, right? I mean, where it's like a streamer will have a consensual sexting conversation with a woman and they'll leak it on the internet and they'll claim it was with a minor when it wasn't, and I mean, look what they did to Glenn Greenwald. He didn't do anything. He's a gay man. He just did stuff that gay men do with another gay man. None of our business, never should have been seen. And that this is just the game. And obviously it's an argument for why, you're probably better off if you're, living a puritanical, life and keeping everything in a marriage. And you're obviously better off if you do that. Right. But that said, that's just becoming routine. Every male political figure, I mean, if he has done something, at some point they're going to convince somebody that they were somehow victimized by it. And I mean, I look at the Eric Swalwell thing. I mean, I'm not a huge fan of Eric Swalwell, but it's like he never had an opportunity to defend himself. It was over. It was over. I mean, it was just people came out and said this, and you read their accounts, and their accounts, it sounds very consensual in the accounts that came out. And nope, it's over. He's done. Bad person. He's out of the race. He's awful. I mean, you look at that and it's just like, damn, seriously? But Joe Biden did what he did to Tara Reid, and they said, oh, she likes Putin. Don't listen to it. And it just shows you it's all up to mainstream media. Right? Anybody, they can make anybody into anything. It doesn't have to be based on truth. It doesn't have to be based on anything. They can just, I mean, it's wild. It's really, really wild. And, and at the end of the day, the only thing that's going to stop this is, and it will stop. And it's not a matter of right or wrong. I'm not even advocating this because, what's going to stop this is it's like inflation, right? If everyone has a dollar loses its value. And after this happens to so many people, people are going to stop caring about this. And honestly, that's scary because rape does happen. Sexual assault does happen. And, there are genuine things that happen that shouldn't happen that are very serious. But now they're equated with things that are not. And it all gets into this gray area. And that, we're getting into this place where if you like the person, what they're accused of doesn't matter. And if you don't like the person, even if they're accused of something very minor, they're a rapist and a pedo, you know, and it just, and that's the territory that we're in. And it's dangerous territory, honestly. It used to be these allegations meant something. But you know, I've seen some bizarre shit in my time. I don't want to name names, but like there's somebody that I used to be in certain activist groups, and there's somebody that I did political work with. I was not in the same political organization as this person, but they were somebody who was involved in certain activist causes that I was involved in New York City. And you know, and all of a sudden I got an email at one point, and it was like, we're exposing this person. It was an older man. And I clicked on the email, and it was like a website dedicated to this man as such an awful person. And I started reading the website, and I have no reason to, this man is not like my best friend. I think I've like talked to him maybe 4 or 5 times in my life. I knew he existed. He was not somebody that I was good friends with or anything, but I just looked at the website and I showed it to a few people. This guy had a consensual interaction with a legal adult, right? He was much older, she was younger, but they were both legal adults. And if you read the text messages that they leaked, she was trying to turn him on very clearly. And he was, and I'm looking at this, and it just looks like he had a consensual affair, that a young woman who was also involved in a certain political cause, and him is an old man who was involved in a certain political cause. It looks like they had an affair. I mean, and you look at the text messages, she's texting him sexually, he's texting her back sexually. I'm looking for the crime. Like, what's the crime? But they've got a whole website, you know, we're exposing this predator and all this. And I'm like, what are you accusing him of having an affair with someone who's a legal adult? Like, this is, you know, and I looked at this and I'm like, this is bullshit. This is absolute bullshit. And what an awful thing to do to somebody. You know, I don't know where things stand. This was a couple of years ago, but if you Google this guy's name, the first thing that comes up is a website dedicated to him that is all just these leaked text messages of him having a consensual sexting relationship with a woman who's much younger, but he's a legal adult. I don't, you know, and it's, you know, I look at this and I'm just like, you know what? And, you know, I'm told that this man who was the victim of this, I'm calling him the victim, right? Because I mean, I looked at the site and I mean, it's like, he didn't sexually assault her, you know, this man believed this was an FBI thing. And part of me says, okay, this is possible. It is possible that it is an FBI thing, right? But at the same time, you know, there's an element of just, it's been introduced into our culture that this is what you do, right? If somebody hurts your feelings, if something happens, you become, you like amplify the way that you're a victim, right? And you amplify the way that you're a victim, and then you know, you blow it up, and you blow up everything on the internet. And it's just, you know, this is the way our culture has become, and this is the new reality. And after a while, it's going to lose its power, and it's already losing its power. You know, and you know, that happened a lot in the punk community. Yeah, well, there was somebody I knew who's not in our political circles, was a musician in another city. She was in the music scene, and she had a couple guys in a band who were living with her for free. And she was just letting them stay at her house for free. They weren't paying any rent. And she finally said to them, guys, like, you got to move on. You got to find another place to live, because this is my house. I'm paying the rent. You guys are not paying the rent. You need to move on. And they were offended by this. And so they made a big post, and it was posted all over the music community. Oh, she kicked us out and she was awful, you know, and all kinds of people had to stop being her friend because, you know, and I see stuff like that. I mean, there was somebody else I knew in another city, who was, you know, she was a young person who rented an apartment, had roommates, and she was a person who disagreed. You know, she took like the more radical feminist positions on the trans question, wasn't into, you know, people that are born male in women's sports, wasn't into, you know, took trans critical positions, right? Critical of the transgender thing. And she was afraid she wouldn't be able to get a roommate, right? That when she moved out, because she disagreed with her roommates on the trans thing, that they were going to put all over the internet, she's a transphobe, and she wouldn't be able to get another apartment. What the fuck? You know, and it's like this cancel culture. And that, you know, I mean, there's a lot of critiques of cancel culture that have been given. One critique that has been given is people who said that it's something that it's like people can hurt other people with cancel culture and it makes them feel like they're changing something. And that's a really good point, right? They don't feel like they can actually change society. They can't stop the wars. They can't stop the low wage police state, but they can hurt this other person who's a working class person just like them. They can hurt that person. So they did something. It's a way to feel like as an activist, you accomplished something. You ruined another activist's life. You ruined the life of your former roommate. You ruined the life of, somebody or your former sex partner or whatever. You ruined their life. And so you accomplished something. That's so sad. That is so, so sad. Oh, wow. Okay. So this person who's basically just as powerful as you are, you caused them lots of hardship when life is getting harder for all of this. Well, good for you. That's great, and that's so sad, right? And that's what you want to accomplish, right? But it's like that's what people feel they can accomplish. They don't feel that they can actually implement political change, but they can hurt somebody else, who is roughly about as powerless as they are. There's that. There's other aspects to it too. But at the end of the day, and I'll just say this, right? At the end of the day, what keeps that shit alive is people cooperating with it, right? That's what Penny said, coalition of the canceled. You have to just say no, right? And at the end of the day, you just have to just say no. I'm just not gonna, I'm not gonna play the ball with that, and you just have to, if somebody comes to you, oh, this person is this person is that, I don't care, not interested. And that's, you just have to just say no. And, and that's what'll end this stuff because it's getting ridiculous, right? And it's getting stupid. And I mean, it continues to get stupid. And, and I think more people just need to, it's kind of like McCarthyism. You don't name names. You don't name names. One thing that people have noted, and this happened in the Palestine movement a lot, right? In the Palestine protests, protesters canceling other protesters was really common. So there's this group what is it, Operation Canary or whatever. It's like the Zionists go to the Palestine protests and they take pictures of everyone there and document this person's anti-Israel, they're a bad person. But there was a much bigger phenomenon of protesters taking pictures of other protesters and saying, well, I'm protesting Israel, but I don't support Hamas, but this person is an actual Hamas supporter. Or I'm opposing Israel, but I don't support evil Iran, but this person opposes Iran, or I am good, but this group that's protesting Palestine, they're a cult. And this game where protesters tattle on each other, right? That is the weakness of, and it is a really, really dangerous aspect of the pro-Palestine movement, right? Is that, it's this game of like protesters ratting on each other, not understanding that the pro-Israel establishment is opposed to all of them. And that's another thing is like a lot of people, and I mean, I made this mistake years ago, and people make this mistake. They think that when they're being canceled, right, if they cancel somebody else, it'll stop against them. Wrong. Doesn't happen. Right. Or they think that, that if they're being canceled, if they canceled somebody else, they can like direct the mob against that person. Doesn't work. The other thing that they think sometimes when they're being canceled is, well, I can just adjust my behavior and apologize for what I said or did. And no, doesn't work. You're not allowed to apologize. That's the first thing about being canceled. And that's actually Peter Coffin has the great essay about the J.K. Rowling effect. J.K. Rowling made a minor comment about something about the trans thing. She wasn't allowed to apologize. Her apology was not allowed. And look what became of it. And same for Kanye West. He said something mild and then he went down a whole rabbit hole, and now he's tried to apologize. That he's not getting as much attention for himself as he once got. But you're never allowed to apologize, right? And that's the crazy thing, because it's what drives the cancel culture is people's desire to harm you. And so if you apologize, then their desire to harm you doesn't go away. And that often what cancel culture leads to is people that had a mild position that you disagreed with, and then when they get canceled for their position, going all in and becoming very, very serious in their position, right? If somebody has questions about the trans thing and then they get canceled by the trans mob, you can bet they are going to be solidly, because they're not allowed to apologize, right? They can't turn around and say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I hurt people's." No, they're not allowed to apologize, and they're labeled this, and anyone they talk to immediately gets emails that you're associating with a transphobe, and so of course they're going to double down on their position. The people that will be friendly to them are people that share the position they've been accused of taking, and people become very, very hard in their positions. J.K. Rowling started out as somebody who had questions, fair questions about the trans thing. Now her whole identity is I am fighting against the trans thing. Would that have happened if they hadn't canceled her? No. Kanye, he said something mild, and they went after him for anti-Semitism. So he did a whole song about Heil Hitler, and and again, would he have done that if he had just made this comment and people had said, "Hey, actually, that's not," but that's not how it works, right? And that there are some people that go away when they get canceled, right? And that's true. There are some people who it's a traumatic, awful experience to go through, and so they just go away. But a lot of people don't, like me, like Kanye West, like J.K. Rowling. We've all been canceled, and we keep going, And so if you just keep going, right? You just keep going, and and that's at the end of the day. There are some people who get canceled, and it's just too much, and they're just done. But there's some people who get canceled, and then they go, okay, well, and they keep going. And Bill O'Reilly, and look, he's still got a podcast. He's still making millions of dollars from his podcast. He's Bill O'Reilly. And that's the other side of cancel culture. Is the reason it's becoming so vicious is because at the end of the day, you can't cancel anybody. It used to be if the New York Times ran a negative story about you, your career was over. That is not the case. That is not the case. And that you can keep going. And that you can keep having a career if there's negative stuff out there about you. And in fact, if you're out there long enough, inevitably there will be a circle of people who hate you. And I guess I'll just end this rant by saying the worst thing you can possibly be. And I'm not saying the worst thing you can possibly be in terms of like this makes you a bad person. Such people are not particularly desirable to be around, but the worst person you can be psychologically, if you want to be miserable, be an anti-fan. Anti-fans are absolutely miserable because they are obsessed with someone they hate, right? It's one thing if you're obsessed with someone you like, that can be unhealthy, right? If you're a huge Taylor Swift fan and you're obsessed with Taylor Swift, that can be pretty unhealthy, but at least you like Taylor Swift. You enjoy listening to her. But imagine that you're obsessive and you think about nothing but somebody that you hate. You're going to be a miserable person, right? You're going to be a miserable person. And the internet is full of miserable people, anti-fans. And that's really what drives cancel culture, is that someone gets noticed by the internet for being bad. The memo gets sent out throughout the internet. So-and-so is a bad person, right? That's what BreadTube did to me. They put my face on blast. This guy is bad, and then these people just emerge I think they have a deep psychological problem. They've got pain, they've got whatever. They need somebody to hate, and they become obsessed with you. And they think about you all the time, and they think about how much they hate you, and and it's like, those have got to be the most miserable people you've ever met. They become anti-fans, where they follow everything you do. They follow every post. They get as much information about you as possible. They think about you 24 hours a day, and they hate you. Those are absolutely miserable people, right? Being obsessed with something you like has its problems, but at least you like it. But being an anti-fan, that has got to be hell, right? Because 24 hours a day, you are thinking about somebody you don't like. And you're thinking about someone who makes you angry. You're thinking about someone you want to harm. And that's who really drives cancel culture, is anti-fans. is people that latch on to a person like Eric Swalwell or I don't know who, and they just J.K. Rowling, and they just think about them all day long and how they want to take them down and blah, blah, blah. And it's just, they and that, I mean, you want to talk about somebody who's a miserable person. That's an anti-fan. And I look back on my career to some degree or other and some of the work I've done over the years. And like there have been times I've written about people like Kamala Harris or whatever who I don't like, and I've delved into it, but I never became an anti-fan. But there were times where I was maybe obsessively hateful, or there were people in my past who I was angry at. And it's like, we all have the potential to go down that road. But you have to kind of stop yourself and be like, okay, I don't like this person. I'm going to argue against them. I'm going to write a critique. I'm going to, whatever. But you don't want to become an anti-fan. You really don't. If you cross into anti-fandom, I mean, it's a really, really low, dark, miserable place to go. Anti-fandom, right? Focus on things you like, not things you don't like. Focus on things you believe in, not things you think are wrong. Right? You can have your principles. You can not like somebody. You can, make a critique or whatever, but you don't have to go into anti-fandom. If there's anyone watching this who is caught up in anti-fandom, I would urge you to look in the mirror and say, is this how I want to spend my time? Is this how I want to spend my days, thinking about this person that I don't like? Is that, if you, a lot of people really don't like spiders. So if you really don't like spiders, why would you buy, if you really don't like spiders, would you buy books full of nothing but pictures of spiders and look at them all day? No, because you don't like spiders. But that's what anti-fandom is. They hate spiders. Spiders are bad. And so they buy stacks and stacks of photo books of spiders and they look at them all day. Why would you do that? Right? If you have arachnophobia and you're afraid of spiders, don't look at the spiders. Right? It's pretty basic. And most people that have some kind of phobia or some kind of great distaste for something make an effort not to see it. But the anti-fandom is the people that have lost control psychologically to some degree or other, that they must indulge in something that makes them miserable. And I don't quite understand it necessarily. I understand that anger can be addictive and anger can give you meaning. Right? If you're on a crusade against something, that can give you a meaning in your life. But there's also another phenomenon that I saw of, there was a certain edgelord type that I knew. I mean, I used to see this a lot. Maybe culture has changed. I mean, I'm not around as much young people as I used to be around. But when I was like college age, high school age, there was a certain type of person I would encounter, often a young woman, but not always. I saw this in men too. It was it manifested a little bit differently. Who, like, they're always desperate to prove to you that they're not scared and that they're tough, and they're doing crazy things. I remember I met a woman when I was in college who told me she was not afraid of car accidents. And I said, okay, I didn't think you were. No, I'm totally not afraid of car accidents. Last night I watched car wrecks on YouTube for 3 hours. I watched them all and I wasn't scared at all. That woman's afraid of car accidents. Normal people don't watch 3 hours of videos about car accidents just so they can tell people and reinforce that they're not afraid of car accidents. That woman was actually very afraid of car accidents. I didn't ask her about car accidents. I wasn't interested in it. She told me out of nowhere she was not afraid of just to show me how not afraid of car accidents was. She watched 3 hours of videos on YouTube of car accidents, wasn't scared of them one bit. She's scared of car accidents, right? And you get that of people that are like, they really have an issue, and they're, and so you get something like that going on where it's like they're not only was that girl afraid of car accidents, she was afraid of her own fear of car accidents. She was afraid that her fear of car accidents made her a weak person or something. So, it's like the fear on top of the fear leads to obsession. And I've seen that in people that I've met over the years. And then, I mean, you get young men, people who do behaviors that are risky, and I don't know, you get all kinds of different types, but, but yeah, someone with a complex, something wants to prove something. I think that may be a factor in the anti-fandom thing. But that's my thoughts, right? If you become an anti-fan, you know, it's the worst place to go, and you're in a negative cycle, and you don't deserve that, right? For yourself, right? Maybe the person that you hate is awful. Maybe they are the worst person in the world, but why would you do that to yourself by sinking into anti-fandom? And then a lot of people don't think things out, right? You want to say to some of these anti-fans, right? So what is the end game here? Like, what do you want to accomplish? Right? Do you want this person to die? Are you like plotting to kill them? Like what would make you satisfied with the person you're anti-fanning? Like, do you want them to feel bad? I'm pretty sure they probably already feel bad. Would you want them to what do you want? And that's a lot of people that engage in behaviors. That's actually a really good question to ask people. If they do anything, right? If they're doing anything that is unhealthy, ask them, what are you trying to accomplish? Because a lot of times when people do things that are not healthy, they're not thinking about it. And so if you say to them, okay, so you say to this girl with the car accidents, so you're watching these car accident videos, why? Because I'm not afraid of them. Okay, so then why, if you're not afraid of them, right? And why watch videos over and over of them? Like, what are you trying to accomplish here? Like, what is the goal? Well, I'm not afraid of anything. I'm not a coward. Okay, I get it, but what's going on here? Right? And I mean, it may not be your business. I certainly didn't say that to the person. I just thought this is a weird person and walked away. But when somebody is doing something that is odd and something that does not make them feel good, if you can ask them, why are you doing this? And maybe it's really not your job, but if somebody somewhere can say to them, can get them to just ask themselves, why am I doing this? And if somehow they're able to actually start asking the question, yes, what am I trying to accomplish here? That can actually be quite helpful, right? I mean, when people think about why they do things, they often change their behavior, right? If you're just kind of acting according to your impulses, sometimes you can do things that are not helpful. But if you stop and go, why am I doing this? What is my motivation? What am I trying to achieve? Oh, well, geez, if I want to achieve this isn't the best way to do this. Or maybe the goal that I'm working towards here is actually not a very good goal to have. If people can do that, but that requires being a bit detached. And this is the psychoanalytic approach. This is why I love Sigmund Freud so much. As much as I don't think Sigmund Freud was necessarily a good person, I think he had very big insights. And a lot of what he was about was understanding your impulses. What is driving you to do what you do? What is driving you to do what you do? Examining that, and becoming aware of your impulses, of your drives. What is behind a certain desire you have, a certain behavior you have? What is behind it? And I mean, I feel like if we can all kind of step back and look at ourselves that way and say, why am I doing this? I feel like a lot of us would make better choices in life. We would, that's neurosis, right? Neurosis is when you're repeating patterns and behavior and making the same mistakes over and over again. It's often because you're not thinking about what you're doing, right? And the idea is if you step back and you go, oh, wow, I'm doing this and it's having this result and I don't like the result and I'm doing this for a reason that's not logical. And okay, I'm going to stop doing this. Then, then you gain a level of control. And then the problem is though, that there's a level of detachment that comes with that. If you start to detach, right, you become less passionate. And that's part of the curse of growing up, the curse of getting older, right? Is that when you're young, you're not aware of all your impulses and you have a lot of passion and emotion and, and your ability to make beautiful art and your ability to speak with passion is much better because you're not aware of everything. But as you get to know yourself and as you examine yourself, you become a little bit more detached from your emotions and you become less passionate about the world. And so there's a little bit of a trade-off, right? When you don't know why you're doing things, you can be very, very passionate about them. But when you know yourself well enough to know why you feel a certain way, well, then you can't get as excited about feeling that way if you know too much, right? If you know what it's really about. And the world is much more complicated than any of us realize. And in fact, that's a sign of a smart person. Smart people don't know how much they know. They know how much they don't know. Let me just point that out, right? A lot of people, they feel smart and they act like they know everything. People that are really smart know that they don't know everything, right? People who don't know very much often think they know everything. The people who know a lot know that beyond what they know, there's a whole lot that they don't know. And I mean, that doesn't match what we know, right? Is that we assume smart people, they just know so much, but actually a lot of times people that are really smart know enough to know they don't know, and they have the intellectual honesty to know that they don't know. So anyway, I could ramble about all these things all night. And yeah, it's we've been going on for a while here. I'm glad to be back. I really, really am. I'm glad to be back. I love our community here. We have a great, great community of people here on this YouTube channel. And the people in the Uhuru movement are amazing. And the people that at the conference I was with in Russia are amazing. I mean, there's a lot of good people in this world. Focus on the good people in this world. Focus on the people you like. Don't focus on the people you hate. Focus on the people you like. And make sure that make sure that they know that you like them. That's my advice to you today. I'll try to live true to that myself. I'll try to do a better job of that myself. But yeah, that's one thing. I'm working on a lot of different projects. I've got a lot to do in the next couple months, but it doesn't involve going anywhere. A lot of it involves staying home and getting the job done. But basically, in the next couple months, we need to get the ball rolling on certain aspects of CPI, in particular fundraising, so that we can make sure that everything that we want to do in the coming months goes smoothly. The world is desperate for what CPI has to offer right now. We have something that nobody else can offer, and we have a job to do. And, when I go to Russia and when I go to the Uhuru conference, I understand how important the job that we are doing is. And there we go. So I hope that you come on board and you join the movement. We're doing great stuff. Keep an eye out for all the great stuff we got. There's going to be some reading groups that start soon that are open. Anyone can join, including online. We got a number of great projects in the works. So get on board, right? Again, I'm not trying to entertain you. I'm trying to recruit you. So get on board, join the movement. We must promote anti-imperialism. Dare to struggle, dare to win. All right, folks, I'm going to have to say goodnight because I need to sleep. And yeah, but hey, at least I talked longer than I thought I would. I didn't think my allergies would let me talk this long, but I guess they did. So that shows that my allergies are not as bad as I thought. So dare to struggle, dare to win. Good night.
New upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today.